Hello friends, this is Utz. You would know if you read the patch notes, and today we're doing the highly requested, highly controversial, I bet, map tier list for Dead by Daylight, where we're going to be taking every map in the game, and we're going to be sorting them out from most killer-friendly to least killer-friendly and most survivor-sided. We're going to do our best to make sure that this information stays relevant. As I'm sure you know, some of these maps are getting reworks every now and then. Most of these reworks are just graphical, but sometimes they also affect the gameplay. So I'm really hoping, and I'm doing my best here to make sure that the information that I give you today is useful and not out of date very soon. So keeping that in mind, what is the point of view that I'm going to be using to approach this? I'm going to be pretending that I'm a killer main, which I am, that plays every single killer equally. Some of these maps obviously play out differently for different killers. If you're a Myers main, you hate Bloodlodge. If you're a Nurse main, you love Bloodlodge. If you play killers that benefit from being indoors, you love indoor maps. If you play Huntress, maybe not so much. So please have an open mind when I talk about maps. I will do it from a general point of view, assuming that we're playing every killer. Otherwise, this discussion would devolve and degenerate into, opinions very quickly, so I'm going to try to stay as objective as I can. In the spirit of remaining objective, obviously I've done my own research and I have my own playtime in this game, which ranks in the thousands of hours, but I've also reached out to many of my friends who are also very experienced in the game to ask for their opinions and test things with them. You're going to see some of the footage that I recorded with them throughout the video, and I've also bothered the devs as much as I could to gather as much information as possible. I've scouted the internet, I found all the stats on all the escape maps and every dev stream that I could that talks about the topic to back up my feelings and my subjective opinions with maybe numbers that, corroborate and confirm what we all suspect. So that being said, before we go into the tier list itself, I'm going to break down some of the concepts that we'll be using so that we understand each other perfectly as we go forward. Gen immediacy, which we'll be talking about, is the ability to find generators super fast. It's really good for survivors if the gens are easy to see and easy to spot. This means that at the start of the match, they can immediately get on a gen, and later throughout the match, if a gen needs to be done quickly, they can immediately find that one or rotate to a different one very quickly. In maps where you can see this gens from afar, this is great. In maps where the gens are very hidden, mostly indoor maps, gen immediacy is very low, and thus survivors take longer to get on their first gen, they take longer to find the final gen, they take longer to rotate between gens if the killers pressure them, etc. So this is a big factor. Another big factor is the gen spread. Some maps have generators that are all cluttered together, making it very easy for the killer to find survivors or to patrol the generators or to defend the 3 final generators. In some other maps, the gens are all really far apart from each other. No matter how you look at it, you will need a long time to patrol them, to find survivors, or to defend your final 3 gens, which is obviously bad for the killer. We're also going to be talking about spawn points. In some maps, the survivors have the luxury to walk around, do stuff, hide before the killer gets there. In some other maps, the killer spawns really close to survivors, and the survivors are all very cluttered together at times, which makes it a lot harder for them to be effective at the start. We'll also talk about how the hooks spread in some maps. Some maps are notoriously bad. Even if you down a bunch of survivors, you might not have enough hooks, or the hook will be too far apart. Whereas in some other maps, the hooks are really close to each other. So survivors making small mistakes can often really quickly lose a game because they're hooked so quickly next to each other, and the killer can defend that quickly. We'll also talk about line of sight. In some maps, the line of sight is basically perpetual. If a killer sits in the middle, because it's a complete barren wasteland, he can see anywhere from any point to another. In some other maps, you have full walls covering everything, affording survivors the ability to go from point A to point B unseen and giving less information to the killer. This is generally good for the survivors, but there's a caveat. Some killers do benefit from being unseen themselves, so stealth killers don't mind line of sight blocking as much. In fact, they kind of benefit from it. We'll also talk about the actual size of a map, how big it is in square meters, and the relative size of a map. Chasing a survivor for an entire football field is really bad because it's very large, but if at the end of the football field he has a building or a big fence or a big structure that he can loop you around for another 20 seconds, that's even worse. So we'll talk in terms of map actual size and also relative size. Maps that have a lot of intricate fences and structures that survivors can run you on are actually bigger than you would believe. So the relative size is even bigger. We'll talk about these terms as well. We'll also talk about, obviously, the strength of the loops. Some maps have very unsafe palettes that you really can't do much with, very unsafe windows. Some maps have insane palettes, insane windows, and often these maps have these things next to each other. So a palette that is very strong will be even stronger when it's next to a really, really strong window. And we'll talk about, how these things interact going forward. We're also going to talk about the potential of bottlenecking. Bottlenecking is when survivors do not have the ability to move efficiently because a killer is just sitting on a choke point, defending a hook or defending a point of interest because the map is designed in such a way. This is generally very good for the killers. If you can hook 2 survivors as a killer and then just sit in the middle and the survivors cannot get through you, that's really, really good. And obviously, as a result, it's really bad for survivors if the map allows this kind of playstyle. We also will talk about potential of basement. Some basements are very centralized, very easy to defend, very worth going for. Some basements are in the corner of a map, very easy to escape, not really worth defending. We'll consider that. We'll also consider totem spawns. The best maps for killer have very hidden, easy to defend, intricate totem spawns. The worst maps for this have very open, very easy to spot, hard to defend totem spawns. But I bet you already know that. There's honestly a lot of other factors that we'll be discussing, but these are the main ones that you need to keep in mind. And hopefully I explain what each of them means well enough for you to keep up with what we're going to be discussing as we go on. But I'm sure you will keep up. One final word, if you're not aware, each map has a component of RNG, of luck, built into it. None of the maps are fixed. All of them have little bits and building blocks that get switched and swapped and turned around, and every iteration of any map is unique. So obviously that makes it really, really hard to judge a map. We're going to try to go on what spawns as an average, but do keep in mind that some of these maps are more unique than others. Some of these maps are generally fixed. Some of these maps can sometimes change dramatically from one iteration to another. In my personal opinion, the more unique a map is, the more predictable a map is usually better for killers. Because killers have to follow a certain pattern and need to deal with unpredictable survivors, I reckon that the least RNG dependent maps are usually more killer favored. But this is a bit of a subjective take, and obviously bad RNG or fixed RNG can also be bad for a killer. So keeping all of that in mind, I think we're ready to get into them. I'm gonna try to be as concise as I can on every map. You could probably talk for like 20 minutes about each of them, but I'm gonna try to get to work, and we're gonna start on the killer-sided part and work our way down to the least killer-friendly maps. And the first map, what I honestly consider is the best killer map in the game in general, is the Dead Dog Saloon, Dead Slingers map, the Cowboy Saloon Western map. For those of you that are not super familiar with it, this map is insane. It is tied for the third smallest map in the game. I've got the data right here. But it actually, in relative terms, is easily the smallest, the absolute smallest map in the game. And the reason why this is because the edges of the map are very barren. There is almost nothing. In fact, a good chunk of the edges is complete dead zones. Other than hiding, survivors cannot really realistically go there. So it is a very, very small map where most of the things are centralized. Hooks are close to each other by the center. Basement is never too far from the center. In fact, one of them is straight in the center, and it's in a shack that has a breakable wall, so it's a slightly weaker shack for survivors if you break that wall than usual. On top of this, the spawns are ridiculous. You can quite literally, most of the time, walk for 5 or 6 seconds and audibly be in front of multiple survivors. They spawn really, really exposed, and in a very, very predictable way that with a bit of experience you will be able to quickly identify. As a killer, if you want to, and most of the times you really want to, you can really be in a chase within 10 seconds in this map, which is really, really, really good. There's no huge walls that prevent you from going anywhere for the most part. Going from point A to point B is almost always a straight, convenient line. There's enough walls for a stealth killer to approach undetected, but not so many that survivors can constantly break line of vision. Some of the stronger loops in this map, admittedly, there are some strong loops, mainly in the main building with a strong window, and sometimes in the back buildings with some strong windows. Many of these strong loops are copies of other loops in previous maps, but they almost all of them, if not all of them, have breakable walls that you can break as you go or break beforehand to immediately make them weaker and immediately make chases around them a lot shorter. On top of this, the general quality of the palette in this map is not very great. Most of these palettes are pretty normal. Once they drop them, you will get ahead sooner than later. So you can either play it smart or just brute force ahead. And for the most part, chases are all in your favor. This doesn't mean, of course, that you cannot lose in this map. But it is a really favorable map for basically any killer. It has great grass for the trapper. It has a great compact running paths for survivors that really benefit a hag. The lines of sight on the generators are almost everywhere. You can stalk generators on platforms with Myers. You can stalk with Ghostface. You can shoot people people doing generators with your Deathslinger or Huntress. Deathslinger Huntress also benefit from most of these loops having holes or being kind of low. So this is a map where almost no killer is ever uncomfortable. The one thing survivors have going for them, as I said, they do have some strong loops that they can use, especially if you don't know how to run them. The bushes are pretty good for stealth. There are some things going for you. Some of those platforms can be hard for the average killer to reach. Sometimes it's really hard. You see a survivor on a platform, you know you're not going to take, but you need to know where to give. If you know which generators are okay to give up on and which ones you should keep an eye on, you can win so easily in this map, so consistently. This map also has a very good gen spread. Gens are generally all predictable and all close to the center. There's none of them that are on the absolute edges of the map for the most part. And it is very easy as a result to 3-gen in this map. In this map, you will have many situations where, especially with Gallows and the back of Gallows, you will have many situations where survivors have 3 generators that are very close to each other. And often these generators are really hard to do for them because they're literally next to a rock, next to a pallet that's worthless. This map also has little to almost no RNG to it. The main structure doesn't switch dramatically. It's always facing the same way. The gallows are always the same. The shack is always the same. This predictability also, I think, benefits you as a killer. And as a result, I would call this probably the most generic killer-friendly map in the entire game. Exit gates are often also easy to defend at a glance. Hatch does not have any crazy spawns. For the most part, it's easy to check, which also benefits killer. And there's probably a long etc., but I think that about wraps it up for the Dawg Saloon. The next most killer-sided map, in my very humble opinion, is, believe it or not, Midwich Elementary School, the Silent Hill map that came with Pyramid Head. Now, this map takes a little bit of time warming up to. It is very difficult at the start to navigate your way around it, but eventually with time, you'll figure out several things that make this map pretty insane for killers. Number one, this is one of the smallest maps in the game as well. Obviously, the relative size of it is a bit bigger because there's a lot of hallways, and sometimes you will need to cover a small distance, you will need to go around things quite a lot. So even though it's a small size map, it doesn't quite feel like one, but it's still a small map for some killers. A huntress obviously has a hard time going around a wall, but a nurse does not. For killers that do not really mind walls, that can teleport through them, such as Hag with her traps or Nurse, this map is pretty damn deadly. And the fact that survivors are forced to go around these halls while you can go through them as some of the killers is very, very powerful for you. But let's talk about navigation. This map is all about how you navigate it as a killer. That's something that the killer needs to learn even more than the survivors. On each corner of this map, there is a way to go up and down. On opposite corners, there are normal staircases, and on the other two corners are two places with breakable walls that you can break to make a ramp to the second floor. Knowing this, and knowing the fact that there's also holes on opposite ends of the openings that lead to the yard in the middle, knowing how to navigate this makes this map so much better. Once you start to navigate and know how to go up and down floors and you're not as lost, you start to see all of the strengths on this map. For one, the totem spawns in this map are ridiculous. They're very, very hard to find. As an indoor map, the gen immediacy is very, very tricky. Some gens are somewhat fixed. You can expect them in a certain area, but they're not 100% fixed. The courtyard has usually a generator, but it can also spawn inside. The chemistry room usually has a generator, but also cannot spawn. The classrooms, all 4 of them, I think, have a generator somewhere, but not always in the same spot. This is really, really, really hard. For the average survivor, finding a generator in this map is not easy. The fact that the classrooms mostly look the same also doesn't help them. So it will honestly take a really good survivor to have an easy time finding generators here without a map, deja vu, or some other perk to assist them. So gen immediacy, immediately good. The basements that can spawn here are naughty. You can go into a basement and then literally body block one of the corners leading to it, making it impossible for survivors to go through unless they take all the way around. And this is a trend with this map. You can put a survivor in the middle of a hallway and then just camp the hallway. And let's say that you're a huntress. And if a survivor's coming from one way and you are blocking that way, they cannot immediately pivot and go around for the other. It takes so very long to go around. So hooks being relatively close to each other, hallways having only one side approach, most of the strong, there's no really any real strong loops in this map. The best thing you can do is play really smart with your pallets, hope the killer makes some blunders, and then immediately go from one to another. A few strong pallets here and there, or a few vaults here and there that can easily be gotten rid of quickly, or that can easily be mitigated by breaking a wall here and there, makes this map almost impossible to really loop a killer consistently in, unless, again, you are playing out of your mind and they are making several blunders back to back. So your chases in this map will be short. Survivors will have an easier time maneuvering for saves. They will have an easier time maneuvering to and from generators. As we've explained, the hallways make it very easy for you to bottleneck and just stay in one place and force them to go another. And we haven't even gotten to the exit gates. The exit gates are completely fixed. And even though there's a little bit of line of sight blocking, they are so close to each other. And even an average mobility killer can go back and forth and check both of them so quickly. Which means that if you close a hatch, that 3K will almost always come to be a 4K. Because the exit gates are so hard to find. Some of the things worth considering in this map. The spawns are a little bit tricky. The survivors can often try to hide at the start, but the long hallways make it easy for the average killer to see you, to see scratch marks. The average killer will hear you if you're on a different floor above him and you're running. Some killers that have high mobility, like Blight, can make these hallways completely trivial. They see you across and they'll immediately sprint. Killers that can teleport, like Freddy, can make the 2 floors play almost more to their favor than yours. The RNG, as opposed to some of the other indoor maps that we'll see, I think is very fixed as well, which makes most of this map very predictable. You go into a room and you see a breakable wall on the side, you know that there's a window there. No breakable wall, there's no window. It's very, very easy for the killer to know what to expect. Some of the parts on this map are honestly death traps. You can go into the bathroom, for example, has a pallet, but if you go into the bathroom from the bottom floor, you're basically dead. You are delaying a hit. The same, there's a reception counter that you can vault over, and it's almost the same. It's basically, there are a lot of little dead ends where you can go to waste the killer's time, but where you're eventually most likely going to take a hit. If you're already injured, you're probably going to go down. Hooks are well placed, they're almost never awkward, and that's pretty much it. This is a good map for almost every killer as well, and a very difficult map for survivors in general. Next up, we're moving to another indoor map. You're gonna notice just how important and how prevalent indoor maps. There are 4 of them. This is the second that we're going over, and all 4 of them rank consistently among the highest kill rate map for killers. So these 4 indoor maps are some of the best, and one of the reasons why is, again, gen immediacy. One of the hardest parts of Hawkins, which is the laboratory, the underground complex, the laboratory, Hawkins, whatever, is the fact that survivors have a hard time finding gens. This map does have some gens that are fixed. There is a huge glass room that always has a gen up top, and an isolation room also that has a single man gen up there. These generators are generally hard to defend. They're on second floors. They take a long time to get there for the average killer. But these are generators that you can totally ignore, let the survivors do them, and just focus on the other generators. And what's the deal with the other generators? The other generators are usually hard to find. They're not very immediately spotted by survivors. They're usually close to each other. Yes, there are walls that block your line of sight, but they are usually close to each other, meaning that the gen spread, other than those 2 generators that I mentioned, the gen spread in this map is generally pretty good. Any 3 gens, for the most part, that you end up, for the most part, again, there might be some exceptions, are pretty damn good because they're not too far from each other. The 3 gen potential is pretty nice in this map. And the map itself is honestly quite different from most maps before it. Most of the pallets in this map can easily be walked around. There are like a couple exceptions, but most of the pallets are completely unsafe. And what this means is that you need to use them in a very specific way. If the killer comes to you and you stun the killer, great. You run to the next pallet. Fantastic. That's how you run these. If the killer just decides to ignore the pallet and walk around it, you will often need to go into this back and forth, until he bloodlusts and hits you, or until he outsmarts and thinks you. So for the most part, the pallets in this map are not on your side too much, and the killer, if he needs to, will brute force hits out of most of them. You need to play them very smart, and this is where good survivors can thrive and where the average survivor will often fail. There's almost no RNG to this map. The rooms switch places, but the general layout is largely the same. The doors are not as bad as in Midwich, but they're still relatively predictable, which benefits the killer, of course. I would say the totem spawns are actually quite hard as well on average for survivors. But more so than this, this map just has difficult rooms. There are rooms that have catwalks up top that can delay the killer, but not always. And there are just so many killer powers that really play into this map. If you play a Myers with a small terror radius, he can approach, and by the time you hear him, he's already on top of you. If you play a Ghostfist, this is easily the best map in the game for just like half the killers, just straight up. This map is incredibly good for Michael. He can stalk you through the catwalks, he can stalk you through the glass without you even seeing him because the glass is barely translucent. Ghostfist can do exactly the same. He can stalk you through the metal grates. He can stalk you through the glass. He can basically, with a 0 terrorist, he can basically come around the corner and stab you, or come around the corner and stalk you to 100 and down you in one hit, if not grab you. The Hag can put traps basically anywhere, and because the entire map is hallways, you will almost always have to trigger it if you go through a trap with almost no recourse. The basements are not terrible. They're generally easy to defend, hard to get in, hard to get out. There is a very good bottlenecking potential. Many hooks a killer can be in one spot, and it's very hard for the survivors to be unpredictable or approach surreptitiously because there's only 1 or 2 entrances to them, and anything else would take too long. Some of the places of this map are also complete dead ends, especially on the second floor with the isolation room. Basically, every room in there is a complete suicidal place to go to. So generally speaking, the killer has the upper hand in most loops. The generators are hard to find. Sometimes some of the gens spawn on platforms as well, which is very easy to miss, and will make it feel as if you're playing with one fewer generator. So yeah, not a lot of RNG, but almost every RNG that can go wrong would favor the killer. And this is just a very tough map that many killers benefit from. Killers with small terrorities benefit from it. Stealth killers benefit from it. Even trapping killers can do all right here by trapping certain choke points. This map is notoriously difficult for certain killers, though. The fact that it's so indoors and so cluttered with walls, it is a very tough map for hunters. It is a very tough map for hillbilly sometimes. It is a very tough map for killers that would like to use their mobility in an open field sort of map. So those killers will have a slightly harder time, hence this is not the best map in the game in general for them, but it should still be a good killer map in general. That's my thoughts on Hawkins. Hopefully, did I forget everything? Hopefully I went over everything. Next up is the game. The GDM mid plan is... it shares many similarities with the map that we just discussed. It is an indoor map. It is actually very, very small, but it is comprised of 2 floors that are basically stacked on top of each other. So the actual size of the map is a little bit bigger. Unlike Midwich and unlike Hawkins, however, the staircases that lead from one floor to another don't always spawn on the same fixed locations. So that does make it quite hard for both survivors and killer to go from one floor to another. Sometimes from the second floor, you can drop down to the first from a number of holes, which is fine. But generally speaking, going from the first floor to the second can be quite difficult and quite tricky. Of course, if you're playing a killer that can teleport, such as Nurse, you're in the money. You do not have this vertical challenge at all, while survivors still have to deal with it. Otherwise, this affects both killer and survivor. Why is this map so good for killer? Despite having so many pallets, this map is littered with pallets. And the thing about the pallets in this map is that for the most part, they're all very, very safe. Once you drop one, basically any of this, with maybe 1 or 2 exceptions, basically any pallet in this map that you drop, the killer will have to break immediately. Because if you play around it, the killer will basically never hit you. So almost every pallet, and there's many of them, is safe. There are 2 floors, and it's hard to navigate them for the killer. So why is this map so high up? Why does it have such kill rates? Why is it so hard for survivors? Whew, there's a lot to unpack. Number 1, even though the pallets are very, very... even though the pallets are safe, that does not really... it does not really change the fact that this map is very stacked on itself. And that helps a lot of killers. A killer that has to use his terror radius to oppress, like a doctor, will have a field day in this map because survivors are literally stacked on top of each other. You will constantly be blasting multiple people. A killer that has a power that depends on range, such as Hag, can basically teleport from anywhere to anywhere on the map. Same goes with Nurse. And this is really, really good because it also means that any generator is never too far from any other generator. And what I mean by this is that the gen spread is very, very tight. It almost doesn't matter what you do, no matter almost how you play out the game as a killer, your final 3 generators are almost always next to each other, no matter the configuration. In other maps, if you pressure the wrong generators, and if survivors played smart, you will have a resulting 3 generator, which is the final one, right? Where one is in one corner, one is in another, and the other one is in a building, and it's very, very hard. In this map, that almost never happens because almost every combination of generators possible, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, almost any combination of those 7 will be very close to each other. So even if a game is going difficult in this map, you will almost always have something solid to defend. There are basically no windows in this map. There's very, very few windows. There's like 3 or 4 ones that you're going to use and almost nothing else. So once the pallets are gone, and there's some really strong pallets here, don't get me wrong, but once those pallets are gone, and they can be gone very quickly sometimes, There's nothing else. There is nothing else. If a killer is defending a 3-gen and the pallets there are gone, you will go down. There's one fixed basement that is really, really hard to get out of if the killer is actively defending it. But that doesn't even matter. You are going to lose because the gens at the end are hard to defend. And the gens at the start are hard to get to. This is one of the maps where getting to a generator is the most difficult. Not only is it hard to know what it is, it's also sometimes difficult to get where it is. So it's going to be very often that you spawn, you know that a generator is above you, but you can't get there in time. Because where are the stairs? The stairs are randomly spawned. Or a generator is below you, but you need to go all the way around it. Meanwhile, the killer doesn't really have to worry about this. The killer only has to worry about finding someone, and the spawns on this map are actually pretty damn good. If you head to the second floor immediately and head to the opposite exit gate from where you spawn, you almost always immediately see the traces of 3, if not all, survivors. So it's very easy to get into your first chase, start getting pallets out of the way, start getting hooks, start pressuring gens, which are always going to be close to you, which is awesome. Play it smart, don't overthink it too much, get rid of the pallets, and then eventually you'll notice that the survivors are just not being efficient. You can still bottleneck, you can still camp strategically, knowing that there's limited angles. It's not as bad as some of the previous maps, but still you can bottleneck a little bit, and on average, 1 or 2 survivors is going to be often lost or not being very efficient in their rotating. You defend the gen, you kick it with Pop Goes the Weasel, that survivor just cannot find the other generator that he should be on, as opposed to some of the many open maps that we'll get to later. Totems are difficult to find. I'm going through my list to make sure. Totems are difficult to find. It's hard for survivors to really scout the map very quickly and get rid of every totem. So if you're dealing with a Noid, for example, that can be really crippling if you don't have a map or a perk to help you. The exit gates are also fixed. They are much further than Midwich and perhaps even Hawkins, but they are predictable, which means that the killer can sometimes, in a 1v1 situation, still have an upper hand at finding you. The hatch always spawns on the bottom floor. It never really spawns on the top floor, which means that the hatch is limited to spawning in only half of the actual map. So if you're also in a hatch situation where the killer has to find it, the chances of him finding the hatch in this map are probably much higher than on the average map, which also doesn't benefit you. You would like to find it first by the time it spawns and you need to use it. So those are some of the reasons why this map is so tough. In the upcoming rework, however, the top of the map is going to be opened up pretty dramatically, and I imagine that's going to make finding generators a little bit easier. So hopefully some of these issues are a little bit better for survivors. This also might mean, however, that this map could become stronger for killers that benefit from having line of sight. So it's possible that maybe killers that don't do so hot in this map, such as maybe Huntress, will do even better on it. So we'll see how that plays out. Next up is our third indoor map. This one is in the next category. It's not as good as the previous ones, but it's still pretty good for killer. This is the Larry's Treatment Theater. Is it called? Is that what it's called? Treatment Theater? Larry's Memorials Institute, the Treatment Theater. This is one of the smaller maps as well. It doesn't quite feel like it because you don't really feel the edges of the map and how big it is at times, but it is one of the smaller maps in the game, which is almost always good for killer. And it is an utter mess. It is all hallways, rooms, with a couple rooms that are predetermined and for the most part predictable. Out of all the indoor maps, this is actually the fourth one we've seen, forgive me. Out of all the indoor maps, this is the most chaotic one, and not necessarily in a good way. Whereas the other indoor maps are mostly fixed, this one is way off the rails. The exit gates are not fixed on 2 sides like all the other 3. They actually are fairly random. They can spawn on the same side, they can spawn on opposite sides, they can spawn on a 90-degree angle from each other. The exit gates are unpredictable. The rooms themselves are unpredictable. The pallets and the windows all play out in very unpredictable ways. There are a few safe pallets, very safe pallets in this map that survivors will quickly identify, but everything else is largely up to luck. You can sometimes have an insane pallet leading to a really convenient window that leads to a really good pallet that leads to another window that then leads to the office, which is predictable and good. And then the survivor has a field day running you through those. And sometimes you can have a useless window that leads to nothing, and an open doorway that cuts off a pallet that would otherwise be pretty good. Now, if he drops, you can just go around that. The RNG in this map is ridiculous. Ridiculous to a point where, unless you're running Zanchin Tactics or Windows of Opportunity or something like that, it's ridiculous to a point where you really don't know what you're doing. And when you don't know what you're doing, survivors rarely have a good strategy. It really comes down to a survivor being very quick-witted and improvising and using what they see for them to run you around this map very long. If such a thing doesn't happen, for the most part, chases are in your favor. Unlike many other maps, you can actually corral survivors into a corner effectively and cut them off. If you chase a survivor into a corner, you don't chase in a straight line. Instead, you begin to open up and eventually chase them into that corner, which is something that you rarely cannot do in larger maps where survivors will loop you constantly. In this one, you often can take the lead and cut off a survivor from escaping, which shortens your chases quite dramatically, and it's really, really good. The basements are generally good. The one in the middle is actually really, really tough. Many killers can benefit from it with a generator right next to it. A Freddy can teleport. A Baba can use his Shenso very effectively. The one in the office is a little bit harder to defend, but it can also, with a few traps on a trapper, it can be very, very naughty. So the basements are generally good. The hooks, they can be a bit weird, but they're not necessarily an issue. The totems are tough to find. The generators, honestly, with a little bit of knowledge, survivors can do okay. There are rooms that have blinking signs, and if a survivor notices this, they'll know that if they look around for 2 seconds, they often will find a blinking light, and that indicates that there's a generator there. Still, even knowing this, it is hard to find generators. It is really, really hard to find generators. It is sometimes hard to find yourself. That's deep and spiritual. It's often hard for you to go into a room and know exactly where everything else is on the map, because the walls just cover everything. The rooms constantly switch, and it's just hard to navigate it. For that reason, gen immediacy is really, really bad. The generators in this map are also not particularly spread out. As a small map that has maybe 1 or 2 gens by the edges and everything else close to the middle, you can get some nasty 3 gens for a killer. So how this map often plays out, you run around the many hallways, you find a survivor eventually, and then you go into a chase. They don't really know what they're doing. You don't know what you're doing, but it doesn't matter. You're just chasing. Eventually, you brute force a down, and let's say you had corrupt intervention. Now there's 2 survivors that are still finding a generator, and maybe one that's already started it. You go for the one that's already started it, then the game is basically at a you're really slowing it down to a crawl. Not to mention too many specific killers, but some killers particularly benefit from having so many walls. The usual suspects, Myers, Ghostface, they really, really benefit from this. Being a small map, it's good for distance-based killers like Hag and Doctor, who can use their turret radius to oppress, or use the small map to teleport basically anywhere and pressure multiple parts of it at once. Killers that don't do so well here, killers that need visibility, such as Nurse and need line of sight, they do really, really bad here. This is not a great map for them. They're still strong killers here, don't take me wrong, but they have a harder time. So if you main one of those, you won't be very enthusiastic about this map, but almost everybody else benefits from it. Killers that have anti-stealth make this map even worse. Legion, Doctor, they can take the one thing that people have in this map, which is that there's so many rooms they can usually hide pretty well. With those killers, you can get them injured very quickly or get them spotted very quickly. They make with Legion, any one mistake they make after you injure them, they go down. With Doctor, many of the pallets that are somewhat safe become completely unsafe with a shock, because they're pallets that are cornered, which means they cannot ever drop them. And if they don't drop them, you just shock them and catch up and hit them. So there's a lot of killers whose powers benefit quite a lot from this map, which, apart from having a small second floor, this map is almost entirely flat, as I'm sure you know. So it is a chaotic map. It's not a predictable map, but in that chaos, generally, I would say killers benefit more than survivors. Next up, we're gonna say goodbye finally to the indoor maps, and we're gonna start talking. I'm gonna make sure I'm recording, for the love of God. Are we recording? Yeah. We're gonna start talking about open maps, and probably the best open map for killers right now is Wrecker's Yard. Wrecker's Yard is quite good. It is not a tremendously small map, although it is on the smaller scale. Let's see what it is. It is I guess it's tied for like the 7th or 8th, whatever you want to call it, smallest map. But it definitely feels smaller than it is because the edges of this map have nothing, have absolutely nothing. Unlike some of the other maps that we'll get to, on the edges, there's no buildings, there's no real pallets, there's usually just rocks and trees and nothing else. So this map, that's kind of like ring shape, actually feels a lot smaller than it is in practicality, because survivors cannot realistically run there. They will need to stay close to the center. And what is in the center? In the center, there is always one shack. After you get rid of the pallet there, that shack obviously is not nearly as strong. The basement will always be there, 100% of the time guaranteed, because there's no other place for the basement to spawn. And this makes this basement really naughty for many killers. A huntress or a hag that puts you there will constantly be a threat. You will not be able to go anywhere. You will not be able to go there and rescue someone without the killer probably being back to that basement really quickly. It is true that the basement is in the center and there's a lot of escape routes possible, but this also means that the killer, no matter where he goes, he's always going to be close. So the basement here, be very careful about it, especially if you think that the killer is going to try to play around it. Very difficult basement to deal with. Then we've got a bunch of jungle gyms and structures. Jungle gyms, I'm sure you know, are the structures that usually have a window and a pallet, which there's like 2 kinds of, and there's usually 2 variations and so on. And the thing about the jungle gyms in this map is that they're never really chained to one another. You will have one jungle gym or one structure with a pallet, and once you get the pallet out of the way, and there's only a few of them, that's it. They do not get to play the window into a pallet, into a window, into a pallet. Sometimes RNG is more favorable in this map, but for the most part, every jungle gym is its own thing, its own entity, fairly separated from the rest, which means that survivors will you will be able to do mind games on them more effectively, or get them out of the way more effectively, because you know that they will not have the constant threat of like being able to pivot and rotate back to something else that's next to it. So as difficult as sometimes dealing with some of these pallets can be, they're basically just individual jungle gyms with not a lot of potential for you to chain one to another, unless you really play well, I assume, or the killer blunders quite massively. So that's all in your favor. The lines of sight on this map are ridiculous. Once you spawn and you position yourself a little bit in the center, obviously you have the shack that's blocking the view a bit, but other than that, you see basically everything. Survivors, for the most part, cannot do anything in the map. That they kind of move almost anywhere in the map without you spotting them at some point, which for the average killer is really good. This is an insanely good map for hunters, insanely good map for a nurse. The openness of the map means it's good for Billy and Blythe, but there's enough things to bounce for Blythe. It's the central basement means it's good for Hag, and Trapper can lock down the Shag. Almost no killer really suffers from this. Even though it is an open map, a killer like Ghostface and Myers can just adapt to it and play just fine. You still have things to get behind. So it's not really that terrible at all for those. In fact, it's quite good because the amount of loops is not crazy high, so you can just get rid of them and eventually brute force your way through them. The totems are nothing special. There are 2 recurring structures that you're going to see. 2 vehicles, we're going to call, that are present in every Autohaven map that we're going to get to later. And in this map, you'll have a combination of 2. You're going to get either a truck, a crane, or a bus. The broken trucks are the weakest. They're literally just a little broken truck with 1 window. Survivors can try to make a little bit of time, but you're eventually going to catch them, and they're basically worthless. You will very rarely see survivors run here unless they're in complete desperation. The Crane is the next strongest. You can mind game it sometimes a little bit, but the pallet in the Crane is actually pretty damn strong. So until this pallet is broken, this Crane is pretty powerful. Survivors can waste your time a little bit here. And then there's the School Bus. There's two variations of the School Bus. When the window is open in the back, this is a decent tile with a strong pallet. When the window is open in the middle, oh, this is a very powerful tile, because that window is really, really nasty. And you still have a decent pallet next to it. So this boss can actually be troublesome. So depending on RNG, you will get one of those three on one spot and another one of those three on the other. And if you have a crane and a bus, that's kind of bad. But if you get a broken truck and a crane, well, that's a lot better. So this oddly difficult map can be even more difficult for survivors if you have one of the trucks next to your gen. We haven't gotten to the part, by the way, where many of the generators in this map are completely in the open. And not only are there dead zones all around the edges, there's also dead zones in 1, 2, I think maybe even 3 of the generators that spawn. So you will be doing generators often in places that are really awkward. And if a killer that's fast comes to you, you're gonna take a hit. And if a Billy just presents itself, you're gonna go down. And it is very, very hard to do the gens near the end if the killer is really pressuring them. For that reason, Wretched Shop, honestly, more on the killer side of things, and a very pleasant map for the average killer. Very difficult one for the average survivor unless you really know what you're doing. Next up, we have Shelter Woods, possibly the strongest Macmillan map for killer. Now, Shelter Woods, surprisingly, is tied for the second biggest map in the game, which honestly surprised me a lot. But when you think about it, it's really not all that surprising. The reason why this map doesn't feel as big as it is again, because the edges are completely barren. There are some good hiding rocks and some good hiding trees, which obviously are not very useful because otherwise the map is a complete wasteland. You can see, other than trees here and there and some rocks, you can see the line of sight in this map is ridiculous. You can see almost anywhere. Survivors can do very, very little to traverse the map and not be spotted from one point or another. So yeah, the edges of the map, apart from some hiding spots, they have nothing. They have really, really nothing. Instead, you'll see survivors orbit around some of the jungle gyms and some of the rock tiles that have pallets in them. But here's the thing. Once you get rid of those pallets, this map has almost nothing going for it. There's one shack, which is the only building. The only other building is a little tree in the middle that does absolutely nothing. And that shack always has the basement. That shack also can spawn next to 3 gens. So 3 genning around basement is not even great. It's not even out of the question. The gen spread is not as tight as some of the other maps we've seen. The gens can actually be fairly spread apart. But for the most part, you will have the information at the start and throughout the match to know what you're doing and to play into your generators to make them as good as you can for the endgame. So even though that's not the best part about this map, it's not that big of an issue. This map is really, really good for aggressive killers that can move very fast, and I think pretty good for the average killer as well. The only thing about this map, obviously, is that if survivors play it smart and you don't know what you're doing and you constantly go back and forth around from one to another and you're wasting time in your chases, the sheer distance that you have to cover, the sheer actual size of the map will hurt a little bit. But if you're smart in your chases and you know what you're doing and you defend your gens well and you realize that they have very little pallets and you play it smart and get rid of them, survivors eventually eventually run out of things. And you have a strong basement to play into. You have usually a very strong start because survivors don't really have a lot of options to spread out immediately. So you can guess which generators they're going to be. And if you find them stealthing, they'll probably go down quickly. This map often has a propensity to spawn single LT walls, which are structures that are okay. Survivors can run you there for a little bit, but not indefinitely. And if it's not really tied to anything, and it's often, as it is, by itself, a survivor in an L2 wall can be down very quickly for the average killer. So for that reason, this map is difficult. If you're playing against the Billy with barbecue, he's gonna be everywhere. You're gonna go down very quickly. If you're playing against the Bubba, even without the mobility, he will get rid of the pallets really fast with his Shamso. You need to make your resources count. You need to make the most out of stealth. You need to make sure that you force the killer to constantly go from the furthest generator to the other and not give him quick chases or quick downs, God forbid. So it is a tricky map for survivors, and one of the friendliest, and this does reflect itself in the killer stats. This is one of the maps where, at least out of the, without considering the indoor ones, where survivors probably struggle the most. Next up is another Macmillan map, which is actually the second smallest map in the game. Used to be the smallest for a long time. It's the Cold Tower. One of my friends said it best. Almost no killer is unhappy to go to Cold Tower. It is a very small map with lots of things going for it. This map, I think for the first time since we started, actually does have some potential for some crazy loops. You will have several structures lined up, and sometimes these structures can be quite nutty. You can get a strong jungle gym into an LT wall that combos really well with a side pallet, with a rock pallet, etc, etc. And this is a bit more of an issue. This is something that you actually have to look out for and understand that this might not be a chase you want to commit to, or this might be strong if survivors know how to use it. It's also got a building that has relatively strong windows that forces you to go to the second floor if you want to deal with the generator there that survivors can use to more or less success. There's always almost going to be a hill that blocks the way. There's a relatively strong shack place on the side of the map that can sometimes be chained together with other things. Like, there are some fairly good things going on for survivors, and survivors generally do not hate this map. Survivors in this map, it's a pretty balanced map. Most survivors will welcome it. So why is it good for killer potentially? First of all, the generators on this map are extremely close together and very predictable. It is almost always the case that in the main building, you will have a generator in the middle, inside on the second floor, and then a generator on the side, and another generator on the side. This is almost always the case, if not always. And this 3-genning is so easy. You will have these 3, and maybe a 4th or a 5th gen, very close. Oh, I'm very sorry. Who is that? I guess we don't see it, but somebody subscribed off stream. Sarah Jean, 128. Thank you so very much. Sorry about that, guys. They should be disabled. I'll mute them in the future, but thank you, Sarah. You're the real deal. So, the fact that you will have multiple 3-gen configurations is nutty. It's nutty. If you play into them, survivors will have a very hard time, especially if you're a good and aggressive killer, doing the final 3-gens. And by the time they have a really difficult 3-gen, it's possible you've already killed 1 or 2 of them, and it's really hopeless. The small size of the map also benefits you in many ways. Exit gates, they are random, but they're never too far from each other. If you close the hatch, you will likely have a success in killing the 4th survivor before they can open it. You will also benefit, killers that benefit from small maps, which are the majority, will have a field day. This is a great map for Hag. It is a great map for Doctor. It is a great map. Even slow killers that generally struggle at everything can do okay in this map. The fact that it's so small and you can push survivors to the corners so well means that as a Legion you can always get multiple people injured, and it's very easy for you to corner them and get one, then get another, then get everybody injured. It's just a general good map for both sides that honestly borders on benefiting killer in many ways. Unless, of course, you're a little bit unlucky. But as we all know, sometimes maps are not the final deciding factor. But I'm sure you're well aware of that. Anything else to say about this map? The RNG on it is quite pleasant. Finding generators is not that big of a deal for survivors. So they do have gen immediacy relatively available. It is a predictable map. The breakable walls in the main building turn it a lot more dangerous. There are some fun mind games that you can do around it. Some unusual things, but you'll have to play a good killer to do well in this map. It's not just an automatic win no matter what. But it is a fun one, and it is a mostly fair one as I've tried to insist on. that's about it for Cold Tower. Next up, we're gonna go to the reworked Azarov's resting place. This is the Autohaven map that has a little shack-like office, and then the shack on the opposite end, and it's shaped like a dumbbell. And this has changed a bit. It used the center of the map used to be extremely tight, and this map had a major problem when it came to bottlenecking. It would be very, very easy for a killer to get one hook and one down, or two hooks on one side of the map, and then just wait in the middle. Survivors will have a really, really hard time getting through without the killer being able to stop them immediately. This has been improved significantly. The middle of the map is now wider, and there's more things going on. It's a little bit easier for survivors to go through, but it is still a bit of an issue. This is still largely a map that you can control as a killer by being in the middle and abusing that dumbbell shape that bottlenecks right at the center. So this is still a bit of an issue. This map, similar to Wrecker's Yard, has many dead zones. You can have generators that are completely in the middle of nowhere, that are hard for survivors to do if the killer pressures them immediately. You have a similar issue where you can have a very strong a very strong boss or a very weak truck. So RNG plays a part in this as well. The main building is kind of silly. It plays a bit like a shack, but without a pallet and with a breakable wall. You can break that wall and that building becomes almost an afterthought. For the most part, a survivor will be able to waste a little bit of your time there, but it's not a massive looping investment for a survivor. Other tiles are usual Autohaven stuff. In the middle, you'll have some of them lined up next to each other, but that's not really a big deal. Being in the middle usually means that you're active, that you're threatening to go anywhere. So if you spend a little bit of time in the middle, getting rid of some of those pallets or going for a slightly longer than usual chase to get a hit, that's usually not a huge deal, because sometimes you're in the middle still protecting something behind you. So it's not as bad as it sounds if you have 3 structures lined up next to each other. Usually one of them will be an LT wall, manageable structures where you have, for the most part, a solid chance to end a chase relatively quickly. The big wasteland like dead zones and the shape of the map itself means that visibility is on the killer side. It's very easy for the killer to control and know what's going on, which means that if you get a basement, that can get ugly quickly. If you have a strong hook in a corner of the map, that can be ugly. The exit gates in this map are quite naughty. If they both spawn on one side, that can be insanely crippling for the survivors, as the killer will be able to control that very well, and it will be very easy to escape into from the other side. But if the exit gates spawn on opposite ends of the dumbbell, then that's actually insanely good for survivors, because the killer has basically no chance of defending both. So that's something that can backfire a little bit. But mostly, if RNG is bad, this map will be very difficult. If RNG is graceful and you play it well and you mind the gens that you do, and you do not allow the killer to 3-gen on one side, which is the major threat of this map, you should be alright. That sometimes is easier said than done. If a killer runs Corrupt Intervention, or if they're smart about the spawns in this map and they immediately know what to allow the survivors to do and what not to. If the killer plays it smart, it's very easy to have one side of the map with 3 generators, someone hooked, and the killer unyielding just right there. And there's basically nothing you can do on that stage. It's going to be very, very hard, especially if the exit gates also happen to be there, so the killer can camp someone to death, and then the exit gates can be defended if you clutch the final generator. Many, many things can be difficult in this map. You need, for the most part, to adapt and be mindful of a 3-gen. The average survivor does not do this very well. This is why this map is slightly, loosely on the killer favored end of the spectrum. That's about it for this one. Next up, we have another somewhat balanced, pleasant, almost no one dislikes map to go to, which is the the Curtis Print Asylum, Father Campbell's Chapel. This map, honestly, one of my favorites. It's got a main building that has windows, that has a second floor, that has a lot of things going for it, but doesn't feel oppressive. There's no insane loops that you can do around the main building itself. Some pallets that can delay the killer, but that will result in a hit if you play them too much. That being said, this map is no joke. Sometimes this main building can have a window that's strong that leads immediately to a tile, which means that after being chasing in the main building, a survivor can go there and then loop you there, or loop you there and then go into the main building. Some of the RNG in this map can be quite cruel. This also happens in Shack. Shack is immediately placed next to a tile that can be a jungle gym. So you can have a very strong Shack with a window that leads into a very strong window that leads into a very strong jungle gym with a solid pallet. So you need to be very, very smart at identifying just how strong of a map you have and how you're going to deal with it, or how you're not going to deal with it and you're just going to focus on the other things. So what does this map have going for it? We're starting to talk in territory where this map is honestly quite good for both sides. The spawns in this map are a little bit tricky. We have a slightly elongated map with a circus, the main building, then the shack side. And it's not always easy to find your target first. They can do a lot of stealth because of the elongated shape of the map a little bit. So the killer needs to play smart. You probably want to immediately start looking at where the gens that you have are and whether or not it's going to be a good idea to defend them. You can have some very, very solid 3 gens in this map. And the fact that it's kind of tight, often you will have good exegates on this map as well. There's a very good chance that the exegates will be on opposite ends and you'll be able to traverse them very quickly. So it's a decently good endgame map for the killer, I would say. I think the average killer has a little bit of everything. It has enough walls and enough building in the middle for stealth killers to do their thing, or for prep killers like Trapper and Hack to prepare a lot of traps and be successful. At least in the current version, the grass is really, really good for Trapper. The falls really play into the Hack strengths. They're going onto the second floor with a Myers or a Ghostface for some long distance unexpected stalks can be really, really huge. Almost every killer has something that they can do here that is fun. And that's what's so great about this map. It's honestly not heavily tilted into either side. The worst thing that can happen for your killer is that you get a very strong setup with survivors that know how to use it, that you're a little bit unlucky in your first chases, and that some of these windows line up in a way that makes it really hard for you to get hits. If you get rid of the pallets, you can play around some of these, but when you have strong windows that you literally can never remove from the game because windows never go away, that's when you can begin to suffer. Not a lot of structures though. You'll often see an LT wall. You'll often see a 4-lane wall that I think almost always spawns in that often spawns in a certain place. The structures are not crazy strong. The map is not crazy big. The main building is not crazy loopable. It is a pretty average map, and it's so average in so many ways that I'm honestly grasping for straws here as to what else to say about it. Good 3-gen potential. Both basements are pretty good. The one in the shack can be next to a 3-gen, which would be really good. The one in the chapel is close to the center, which makes it easier to defend and easier to get to. So lots of things going for you as a killer if you end up going here. And I think that's pretty much all there is to say about the chapel. Next up, we've got Wretched Shop. Wretched Shop is another Autohaven map. And this one also has 2 vehicles that spawn. So immediately, you already have a big RNG component that you have to look at when you spawn on this map. Are you going to get a bus, or are you going to get a truck? Is it going to be the best bus possible with the window in the middle, or is it going to be the worst bus possible with the window in the back, which would still be pretty good? Lots of RNG in this map in particular, it seems to me. Almost more than any other map, I've seen this map be completely ridiculous or completely absurdly powerful for survivors. Sometimes you can get a good debris obstacle pallet next to a good rock with another pallet next to a jungle gym that leads to the main building. You can get some decent. Sometimes you will see a generator literally in a wasteland dead zone with nothing around it, and that is a bit of a trend in this map. It really is. It seems very likely that you'll see a lot of dead zones around it. And it's part of your job as a killer to identify which gens are going to be easier to defend later on, and maybe know which ones to maybe give up if you need to. The main building is arguably one of the worst main buildings in the game, in my opinion. There are 2 windows that can spawn. If one of them, if you get the one on the right from the front, that's great, because then the one on the left will be blocked. And if the one on the left is blocked, do not break that breakable wall. This makes this building be a complete cul-de-sac, a complete dead end, where if survivors go there, you're basically guaranteed a hit, and the only thing they can do is go towards the window. So if you approach from the window side, a survivor that's in the main building will basically get a hit, unless they sprint burst out of there or something, will basically get a hit no matter what. So if that's the one you get, that's wonderful. If it's the right window that's blocked, then it's a little bit more complicated. They have a bit more room. You probably want to break that wall, perhaps, if you feel like they're using it well. But yeah, if the basement spawns there in the main building, it's very centralized, and it can be very, very good. Especially, again, if you get the cul-de-sac, if you get the dead end version of this building, and you put someone in the basement and you trap it, or you put, there is very little they can do. If you're a Myers and they need to get in there, you can just sit there and they'll have to walk all the way in, letting you get to tier 3 and tier 4 if it ever comes out. So very, very difficult building. Very easy for you to abuse it if you get that configuration. If you get the basement there, it's great. If you get the basement in the shack is actually not that far from the center, so it is fairly defensible. It is a fairly good basement, so both of them are centralized, which is great. Similar to Wrecker's Yard, this map does have some tiles that can be jungle gyms, or can be single, simpler structures with a pallet, or LT walls. Most of them, for the most part, are largely independent. They do not necessarily, there's no 2 jungle gyms right next to each other. So it's up to you to identify how much they can chain looping into something else, which for the most part is very little. So for that reason, if you're a killer that can get rid of pallets really quickly, or if you bring bamboozle, you will be able to get hits or get the pallet out of the way on these loops very, very quickly, which is great. Obviously, Autohaven loops have changed a little bit, but they're still easy to stalk through. You should be able to still get hits through hatches and Deathslinger, although I think the hitboxes are a little bit wacky right now. Hopefully that gets corrected. But most of these loops are generally good for you. They shouldn't take forever. Most of them are just pallets that you get rid of if you need to, and now that entire part of the map is a complete dead zone. Because the map is not particularly huge, it's actually tied for the 5th. It's actually tied for the 5th biggest map in the game, the Wretched Shop. But funnily enough, as I said, there is so much dead zone in it and so much dead zone around it that honestly, it might be one of the smaller maps in the game. At least it definitely feels that way. And because the survivors don't have any huge wall to run you around, the relative size of the map is way, way smaller. And the actual map that the survivors can use and the generators themselves are not particularly spread out on the edges. You'll notice that they're all more cluttered towards the center. For that reason, this map does not feel that large. And securing 3 gens is very, very doable. On top of that, is there anything else that is worth bringing up? Sometimes the orientation of the building can play into your favor or not, and can make things harder or easier. That's something that you need to consider. If the building is facing the middle of the map, it's obviously easier for you to see and to walk into it. If it's facing the back, you will be forced to go around every single time you want to check or pressure the gen. So again, RNG does play a big part in this map, but on a general note, it's a decent, it's a map that's somewhat balanced, where you have a decently good chance of doing well as a killer, especially compared to some of the ones that we'll see in a little minute. I think that's about it for this map. I might be forgetting something, but hopefully it's something not too critical. Next up, we have the Suffocation Pit. We're really starting to get into the more balanced, in my opinion, maps that, and after this, it's gonna get worse and worse. Suffocation Pit. Let's start with the good things for survivors. Suffocation Pit. Let me check the size. It's a relatively big map with a lot of stuff in the middle. So lines of sight at the start are pretty damn good. You have a really good chance at the start of going whatever you want and being undetected. However, a little bit similarly to Autohaven, Azarov's resting place, this map has a bit of a bottleneck issue at the start, where it becomes thinner. And once the killer gets through this middle, on the edges and on the sides, there are a lot of dead zones. Unless certain hills spawn here and there, the killer can see you very, very easily. Many of the gens on this map are just hanging in there on a dead zone. Some of them are perfectly covered. Some of them are a lot safer. So the killer, once he gets through this middle section that's heavily populated with buildings, it does get a little bit harder not to be spotted. But still, as I said, a relatively large map that's well divided into 2 bits. The top one with the main building, and the bottom one with the shack and a bunch of stuff. Notably, this map has a bunch of structures in the middle that can range from L2 walls to jungle gyms, and the way these are linked together is actually pretty damn scary. This is probably the biggest. You'll notice that the edges of this map don't really have any jungle gyms. All of them are concentrated on the middle. And you'll notice that this is probably the biggest amalgamation of jungle gyms and structures in the entire game. You have one that goes into another, that's not very far from another, that's also not even too far from the last one. And that can be quite nutty. If you commit to a chase where a survivor uses a window, drops a pallet, breaks the pallet, uses a window, breaks another pallet, you will lose the game very, very quickly and get absolutely nothing out of it if you commit to that for too long. However, what is the one benefit of... it's also, before I segue into this, it's also very difficult to mind game in these tiles, because sometimes when you try to mind game a survivor in a certain tile, he will already be chaining into the next one. So that's another added difficulty to this. But despite all of this, why is this not a horrible thing? Why is this map not horribly survivor-sided? It's because these are in the center. And because for the most part, you can get rid of the troublesome pallets while still exerting adequate pressure on everything else. Because you are close to the center, it's very likely that by the time you're chasing someone here, you already have a hook on the other side, and you're kind of defending the center, or you already have a hook in the center and you're defending the hook, or you're already patrolling the generators in the center, which there's at least a couple of. So you can get rid of some of these pallets or get hits here while you multitask, while you go from one into another, while you defend a generator, while you patrol generators to look for survivors. You can multitask, and you can be in the center applying, threatening to do multiple things and stopping multiple survivors while you do this. So if you have a survivor hooked on the shack side, and suddenly you need to chase someone else in the center, you will still be preventing maybe another survivor from coming through the center, because you will be there to maybe hit them. So because you can do multiple things at once, it's not the absolute biggest deal. Although if you lose the game, it's very likely that you lose it because you played the middle wrong. The shack is mostly unremarkable. Is not usually tied to any other strong structure. There can be a pallet or two near it, but for the most part, the shack you can deal as a single entity. The mining building used to be really, really powerful. It's not really that powerful anymore, and there's a breakable wall that can open it up and make it even more accessible. So this building can be more of an afterthought. The pallet that was next to it has been nerfed as well, so it's not really that strong. A basement in this middle building can be super powerful if you have a 3-gen around it. And the same goes for shack. Shack on the opposite side can also be a really powerful basement if you have a 3-gen around it. Much like Azarov's, this map will often come down to having a 3-gen on one of the sides. And if you do that as a killer, survivors are in a world of pain. You will have a basement on that side, no matter what. There's always going to be a basement on one of the two. So you have a potential basement on your side of the 3-gen. Some of the gens on that side might be the kind of gens that are really hard for survivors to do, because they're just gens sitting in the middle of nowhere. So depending on the killer that you're playing, they can be either dangerous or just straight up deadly. The middle part of the map being tighter means that Hag will have a field day. You put a couple traps on the choke points On the edges, you will be catching people left and right. You can concentrate all of your efforts in the middle, and no matter what they do, they're mostly going to step into them. It's a decent map for almost any killer, truly. So yep, that's pretty much the Suffocation Pit summarized, and not much else to say about it. I would say. Next up, we venture into the first of the farm maps. Arguably, the better of the farm maps is Torment Creek. It is the broken silo map that has a shack, and I believe a combination of in this map you will have a combine harvester as well as a cow tree, which is a trend in farm maps, you will see. The combine harvester is a decent structure. Survivors can go there, waste a little bit of your time, but if you have a good, unless they have a really good head start, if you've caught up to them, you can also get hits here as a killer, and you can also mind game it, and there's a good back and forth between killer and survivor, where you have the upper hand, I would say. However, the cow tree is a lot more difficult. For the most part, this map is this structure is very, very difficult. Survivors loop you on the long side by vaulting the window. Eventually, they drop the pallet, but they don't even need to drop the pallet. They can also loop you on the small side of the pallet before they drop the pallet, and then chain this into another pallet nearby, or the shack nearby, or whatever it is they find. So the main building itself can also be a little bit tricky. It has a decently strong window with a pallet on the side, often a pallet on the opposite side as well. It can be a bit tricky. It's not the absolute worst, and you should be able to deal with it, especially once the pallets are out of the way. And some killers don't even have that much of an issue with such a window, but it's still a decently strong main building. The nice thing about the main building, however, is that it's stuck on a side of the map. So if a survivor is in the main building and they're looping you there, they cannot vault the window and immediately run to the other end of the map. For the most part, you will be pressuring them from the middle into a corner of the map, which is really good because it cuts their escape options significantly. Around the main building, options to 3-gen galore. On the opposite of the map, around shack, options to 3-gen also sometimes available. So 3-genning in this map is very much doable. The problem with this map, you will have 2 jungle gyms that will be strong. Sometimes these jungle gyms can be next to L2 walls. Sometimes they can be relatively close to the shack. They can be relatively close to harvester, or worse, the cow tree. So survivors do have a fair amount of chances. Also, this starts to be one of those maps where corn really gets in your way. There are generators that are in actual dead zones, but because the corn obscures your vision, it's not so easy to realize when a generator is being worked on and when you can actually go there to do damage. On the other side, survivors with their third-person camera have a lot more vision. So if they have a good sprint burst, or if they have a good head start, they can, when they see you approach, they can start going away, and it's gonna make it a lot harder for you to actually pressure those gens that are in the middle of nowhere, because they're actually surrounded by a fair amount of corn. Although in this map, it's not nearly as bad. So while being one of the better farm maps, it's still a little bit difficult. Survivors will find gens very, very quickly. They are mostly either in the main building. I believe it's almost guaranteed. They're either very fixed in their location or very easy to see above the corn with the long pole of light. So survivors will have almost immediate gen immediacy, which is good for them. They will have a good head start with the corn many times that you're coming. They have some strong structures. They can have some annoyingly convenient pallets next to a shack. They can have some annoyingly convenient pallets in the middle that are all fairly strong. So this map can be a bit troublesome, but it's probably still one of the most manageable, if not the most manageable, out of the farm ones. And that's pretty much all there is to say about it. It's also not the absolute... it's also not the absolute biggest map, but it is pretty close. It's the fourth biggest. It's tied for the fourth biggest map. That being said, the edges, despite having corn and being slightly obscure at times, the edges are relatively barren. There's not always a lot of stuff near the edges, so it's not as bad as the size alone would indicate. Next up, we're moving on to Rancid Abattoir, which actually is the smallest map among the farm ones, and is tied for the third smallest map in the game. However, this map does have things around its edges, and is fairly spread out. The gens here can be quite literally in the corners. So even though it's one of the smallest maps, it doesn't necessarily, compared to the other farm maps, it definitely feels smaller. But compared to the average map, it doesn't necessarily feel very, very small. So what's up with the Rancid Abattoir? The Rancid Abattoir is the map that has a slaughterhouse in the middle. This slaughterhouse can have a number of configurations. It can be facing a certain way. Some of these configurations are more valuable, are more favorable to killer. Some of them make it harder for you to gather in time. The main building is powerful, to say the least. Not as powerful as it used to be, thank goodness. It has a decent window on one end next to the basement. It has a decent window, a decent pair of windows and open doors on the other side, which you can use to get inside from the outside and be safe. You can also go through these windows when you're leaving. There will always be two pallets on opposite ends. They're not the absolute strongest pallets in the world, but since they are so conveniently placed around this building, swabbers will often be able to use them just fine. They have a bit of a head start, you catch up, they just get to the pallet, and that gives them a little bit of oxygen, extending a chase that might have ended there otherwise. So the fact that these pallets are always there in the middle is really, really good. Again, this map will have a combination of Harvester and Cowshed. And the fact that the map is so small sometimes makes it a little bit awkward, because some of these elements can be very, very close. You can have a Cowshed that leads to a jungle gym that leads to you can have a, basically, if I place it right, you can have something such as a jungle gym into a Cowshed, into an LT wall, and into shack with a pallet in between. And sometimes, depending on the configuration, depending on on the direction that each of these elements is facing, you can have some truly despicable, truly disgusting setups where honestly the map just runs itself. Like a killer will chase you and you just go spacebar, 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 maybe drop a pallet, spacebar, and there's relatively little that the average killer can do in some of these places, other than hopefully not commit to them for too long, or if it's a pallet involved, get it out of the way as soon as humanly possible. So in this map, it's very, very critical that you do not blunder your early game and you try to find out where they are as soon as possible. Get to a hill, have a look, try to guess where they spawn, check quickly, check on otherwise, listen to your perks if they're giving you information, because if you lose generators early and the swabbers save the resources in the map for later, it will be a losing battle. Because they will have too many of them to really throw at you. Ideally, you get rid of some of these resources, and even more ideally, you split the map in two. On the shack side, sometimes the opportunity for 3gen being a small map can be really, really, really good. And on the opposite side, sometimes as well, 3gens are a possibility. So it's not really a crazy idea to get rid of all the pallets and really grind down survivors on one side of the map and try not to even bother going to the other. If you're playing a territorial killer such as Trapper, this is almost a necessity. When I play a Hag or a Trapper match in this game, there's a part of the map that's just off limits. I just never go there. Never, keep all the pallets there. And I'm just going to double down on the one side where I've trapped, where I've gotten rid of everything, where I got the basement in Shag, and where I can really, really hurt them if they keep going down. You play it like that, your chances in this map are a lot higher, and survivors will be under a lot more stress. However, if you do the opposite, if you lose gens at the start, your 3gen is all over the place, and then suddenly any survivor you chase seemingly just finds this ugly combination of like loops, it will be a lot tough. A lot more tough. The corn in this map is not as obnoxious as in others. but it will still limit some of your field of view. It will still limit some of your line of sight, which means that survivors might have the upper hand early, which means that you might be going to places to check and waste a little bit of time traversing the map without actually knowing. So more important than ever to rely on your perks and your instinct to know where to head ahead of time, as opposed to just wandering around the map. Be very territorial in this map, and you'll have a better chance. But overall, it's a decently good map for survivors, and I would say a balanced one, I suppose. That can be really, really difficult if you get the right RNG and survivors know what they're doing. And that's pretty much it for the Rancid Abattoir. Next up is the we're going into the Yamaoka maps, and we're gonna start with the Sanctum of Wrath. Now, this map actually has many things going for it that are really, really amazing. It has a middle building that honestly is not troublesome at all. It's a huge pyramid with the cut top of sorts. It's a huge pyramid-like temple with 2 ways to go up on opposite ends and a little staircase on the side. Many ways to drop down with windows and open rails that you can just jump out of. And coming up here as a killer gives you a ton of information. It's not so much a bottleneck because you don't really stop survivors, but it is a very good information bottleneck. You can, if you have multiple injured or down or hooked survivors on one side, you can go up there, and if you didn't know where everybody else is, it's very easy for you to gather information very quickly, see gens from a distance, scout the map for any useful information. So getting up here as a killer is great. Survivors have a pallet up there and some windows, but for the most part, survivors will not be able to loop you here, because the building itself has very little in the way of protection, which is great. It can have a basement there, which can be sometimes convenient, but rarely you don't play around it very much, or a basement in the shack. The shack used to spawn on 2 sides, and I'm not sure it can spawn on 2 sides anymore. I'm not sure if after the rework, I'm very sorry, I should have maybe double checked this. The shack used to be able to spawn on 2 sides, which is very unique. Usually shack spawns are fixed. I'm not sure if that's still the case. Do forgive me. I'm going to try to think my darndest. I think it doesn't do that anymore. I think that after the rework, it doesn't do that anymore. But if it does, please forgive me. Unforgivable mistake on my part, not to give you the accurate information. But yeah, if you get the basement in the shack, it's quite on a side of the map. It's not very. Let me find how big this map is. It's right about the, yeah, it's actually, hold up. It's right about the middle in terms of size, but still having a basement in a corner of the map, not fantastic. But you might be like, well, isn't a basement good in a corner of the map if I can 3-gen? That's what we're getting at. The gen spread in this map is actually ridiculous. This is single-handedly what puts this map so far. A map that would otherwise be very good, where otherwise you have very good chances, has one huge flaw to it that will make it very difficult for you as killer if you're unlucky or if you don't know what you're doing. This map, despite not being the absolute biggest, the reason it's not the absolute biggest is because it's cut out and it has a thinner center. But the extension of this map is actually rather vast. And if you pay attention to it anytime, you will notice that this, as I say, rather vast map has generators on all 4 corners. And sometimes RNG can be kinder, sometimes it can be rougher, but for the most part, you're going to see that on one corner of the map, there's a generator. On another corner, there is another generator, which is followed by another corner generator, and where you spawn in one of the corners, presumably another generator. This is really scary. There's also a generator in the middle, so that makes 5, and then there's 2 generators randomly throughout, not too close to the main building, usually on one side. So even if you 3-gen on one side, the gens are pretty far apart. Even on a single side, the gens can still be relatively decent apart. And God forbid you have a 3-gen that involves both sides. It's unholdable. It is very, very, very difficult. If in this map, you can have some of the worst 3 gens possible, where one generator is on you and the other 2 are in different continents. For that reason, you need to be supremely confident in what you do with your time. I have lost games in this map by just sheer virtue of me walking to one side, not finding anyone, and then gens starting popping away. Use your game sense, use your instinct, use your perks to the best of your ability to immediately find survivors and pressure them, and be very, very careful about the gens that you lose. Try to defend the middle gen as much as you can, unless you have a secure 3 gen on one of the sides already, because the center will always be a place that you'll be going to and through and from. And be extremely careful, because the spread of survivors and the spread of generators is honestly very, very, very large. You don't have an easy basement that's easy to defend. It takes too much time to get to it. You only see it from a side. The basement here is honestly not that powerful in my estimation. You don't have a lot of things to fall back on. Similarly to Azarov's, the fact that the map is split in 2 and it's so stretched out means that if you get exegates that are on the same side, that can be amazing. But if you get exegates that are on opposite ends, it is a complete lost cause that those survivors will split up and open them. Or if it's one survivor, it's very likely that he'll be able to open it before you can patrol them effectively. So exegates can be troublesome. The first gens can be troublesome. The final gens can be troublesome. What is even good about this map, other than maybe the center? Fortunately for you, the loops in this map are fairly tame. It's usually rocks with pallets, lots of grass to hide in, but not much else. And then there's maybe a little jungle gym, maybe there's a little unique tile with a pallet, and these are fairly straightforward. You get rid of the pallet, or you mine them the tile a little bit, you get a hit, that's it. There's no crazy super safe pallet into super safe pallet into super strong window into the shack into a spaceship to go to space. Fortunately for you, the loops in this map are on your favor. Many killers benefit from the lower from the loops that have lower obstacles. Michael can stalk, hunters can shoot over, Plague can puke over most obstacles here. The center again is powerful, so you got all those things going for you, which is great. But do be careful of the very, very, very difficult gem spread. The generators are not particularly hard to find in this map either. And the fact that survivors spawn so spread out, maybe on your side, maybe on the opposite, means that they will likely find generators fast. So you really need to mind that. Other than that, it's a very manageable map. And if you kill survivors faster than they can finish generators, then you won't even have to deal with the final 3 gen, because you'll outkill them. But when you go against better and better survivors, that will become harder and harder. Next up, we have the first of the swamp maps, the Blackwater swamp maps, which is the Pale Rose, which is a little bit friendlier than the other one that we're going to see. The Pale Rose is the map with the 2 ships, the 2 boats. And there are some things that are fairly unique to these 2 maps that are worth bringing up. I'm going to talk about these 2 things that apply to both of them. So I'm going to talk more in detail now, but later when we talk about the Green Pantry, know that all of these same things basically apply to that. So this is a map with a very limited pallet count. There's only one jungle gym that can sometimes be an LT wall, that can sometimes be a proper jungle gym with a pallet in the window, that can sometimes be a 4-lane jungle gym with a very weak pallet. So there's only one jungle gym that might not even have a pallet. There's not the main building. The secondary building is a little bold with a vault that's kind of strong, but not for too long. And then there's a shack, which is largely by itself. And then there's a main building. Like, what's the deal? What's the deal with this map? What makes it so tricky if there's not that many strong pallets? Well, for one, there are some really strong windows. If you play a killer that relies on getting rid of pallets, such as the cannibal, you shred through a couple pallets with your chainsaw, and now survivors are against the ropes. Those windows are there forever. And there are many of them. So a killer like Cannibal can really struggle. On top of this, the map is cluttered with grass and differences in elevation and platforms and all kinds of things that really make it easy for survivors to see you from a distance. and makes it really tricky for you to keep track of survivors. The spawns in this map are quite ridiculous. Survivors are unpredictable. They're hard to find with all of the grass. There are hiding spots that are just way too good. So it is tricky to find survivors. The only nice cue about that survivors given this map, if they go to the main building, they will set off crows that you will hear across the map. You'll hear a murder of crows go up and make a noise. But that only tells you that they're in the main building. They might not even be in the main building, the boat. They might just be around it. So, and if you go there and they are in there, the main building is actually really, really strong. It usually comes with a couple pallets that are either on the bottom floor, which are good, or on the top floor, which are great. There's always a generator there that they will want to complete. There are drops out of the ship. There are drops down into the ship for balance landing users. The basement can be there, and it's a really strong basement if you secure it. But it can also be in the shack, which is a lot harder to secure, to procure and secure, because it's not as close to the center and it's largely disconnected. So if you secure the basement there, that can be alright. That can be quite good for a trapper. But there's so many ways in and so many ways out. For the average killer, this can be a really, really tricky place. Survivors can run you a lot. They can trick you a lot. You can make a lot of mistakes and give them a lot of distance. They can quick and quiet into a locker. You might never know. They can balance landing out of it. They can drop pallets and drop with balance landing. They can use lithe on pallets. There are so many things that can go wrong, and you can commit to some really bad chases in this main building. On top of this map has an extremely annoying quality to it that I don't even know how to bring it up. For some reason, this map has spawns for items on the edges of the map. These maps are pretty big. Green Pantry is one of the fourth biggest, and Pale Rose is like the sixth biggest. So these are pretty big maps. And the edges of the map are not even terrible, because there are items in there. And what do I mean by items? If you're a trapper, you will get traps that spawn on the edges of the map, on the extreme edges of the map, which means that you will need to waste time to go pick them up, or just be missing out on part of your power. If you are the Plague, there is a really good chance, because there's so many spawn points, that many of your fountains are going to be by the extreme edges. And let me stress that, extreme edges of the map, where there are often no generators, no loops, no reason to ever go there. So if you go there and drink up from one of your red pools, survivors are going to have an insanely good head start on you. Unless you're actively chasing a survivor into it, drinking from that pool of devotion that's corrupted will give survivors the go to literally go anywhere, and you'll be so far away from anywhere that matters. This also extends to the hatch. If the hatch spawns in this map, you cannot just move around the middle and find it in one of the normal structures that you and the survivors typically travel through. The hatch can spawn in basically any point in this map, including, again, the extreme edges, which means that you have to, if you want to secure a fourth kill by finding the hatch, give up on it. You're going to have to literally get a compass and start navigating the entire thing, which is extremely unpleasant. It's unpleasant for survivors too, because the totems can spawn on the edges. But if a totem spawns on the edge, it's possible that they might even spawn on top of it, because survivors often spawn at the start of the game by the edge of the map. So, it's not like this quality of these maps is honestly really bad, but it's particularly bad for the killer side. And I'm sure I'm missing something else. I'm missing something else. Sure, Freddy will have the clock spawn further, which can be good, and Pig might have the boxes spawn on the edges, which can be good for her. But for as a general rule, this part of this map is really annoying. The fact that they can stealth just adds onto it. The fact that they have some strong windows just adds onto it. The fact that RNG sometimes gives very convenient pallets between some of these things makes it really difficult. We haven't really talked about the pier. The pier can have some really strong configurations, where survivors can use the windows almost every single time you chase them off a generator. Generators are hard to see because of the pier, because, you know, it's honestly just unpleasant. It's just unpleasant. The nice one thing about this map, as I said, is that there's not a lot of pallets to it, and there are killers that don't mind windows too much. If you're playing a good nurse, and you actually have an easy time finding survivors because of your perks or your game sense, there's very little they can do here. They will go through a window, you'll be there, you'll hit them. They will have 0 pallets to stop some killers, and that can make a difference. So that combined with the strong basements that you can sometimes get, combined with the somewhat of a 3-gen that sometimes you can get. These are maps where getting 3-gens is actually quite difficult. Also combined with the fact that the average survivor maybe doesn't know how to use the main building too well. This map is manageable. It's manageable, but it is unpleasant. And if survivors know what they're doing and they get decent RNG, it can be tricky. You'll have to be very mindful of where you go and which places you commit to. Because there's a lot of potential to go to a place and find that, you know, it's really not worth chasing someone there, or there was no one there in the first place. Next up, we're going to the other Yamaoka family, the other Yamaoka family map, which is the family estate, or the state residence, I think it's called, which is the first Yamaoka, the spirit map. This map shares some of the qualities with the Sanctum of Wrath. For one, the loops on it are not absolutely ridiculous, and they're largely by themselves. So you don't have loops that, you don't have a crazy jungle gym into a crazy jungle gym into a crazy window into a crazy rock into a crazy shack. For the most part, things are largely self-contained, and you can play everything as a single entity, and that's great. Some better palettes here and there, but almost every killer has something going on in here. Stealth killers can approach relatively well because the lines of sight are not crazy. Range killers have a multitude of loops that they can shoot over or stalk over and stuff like that, which is pretty good. The main building has some strong windows here and there, but you can break some walls and they're a lot more manageable. It's really, in terms of loops, this map, I would say, is nothing too crazy. The problem about this map is that despite how big it is, despite being a medium-sized map, it is fairly stretched out. So even though it doesn't have a lot of square meters compared to some of the other maps, it is pretty stretched out, which means the furthest gens from each other are really, really far. And this spread is pretty ridiculous as well. Maybe not on the level of the Sanctum of Wrath, but the elements of this map are not centralized at all. They are pretty spread out on the edges, as if this was a coal tower kind of map, which can be really, really painful. Much like Rancid Abattoir before, at some point you need to decide which part of this map you're going to commit to. And there's good arguments for either side. On the main building, you often have 1 gen on the left of the main building, 1 gen on the right, and 1 gen inside the main building, which is great. It means that you can 3 gen around there. And if you have the basement there, even though it's a bit of an awkward basement, that adds to it, which is good. And then on the shack side, you can have a gen inside shack, a gen next to shack, and maybe a couple gens close to it as well. And you can have multiple 3 gen configurations around there. You can commit to that as well. And since there's not a lot of crazy strong loops after you get rid of a couple pallets, that area can be in your favor. The problem comes when you neglect this, or when the survivors are just doing so well at the start that this becomes impossible. And you have a gen in the main building, but also a gen in the shack, but also a gen in the center. And these are your final 3 gens. There is no way you can cover that distance that far. So 3 genning in this map, possible if you prepare for it, extremely difficult if you're caught off guard. So it's something that you need to keep in mind. It will either break or make your victory in this game. Compared to the other map, I would argue that it's slightly worse, because the main building itself actually is troublesome. You do not go there and immediately have vision over everything. You go there and you're confused, because survivors can weasel their way out of it in a multitude of ways. The early game of this map can be really tough. There's a lot of grass to hide in. Even though the map is kind of thin, survivors have plenty of ways to get through you, for the most part, at some point or another, without being spotted. Especially at the early game when you have no pressure on anything, and they have freedom to go whatever they want. So survivors can really do their first gen unannounced, and it can be very, very difficult. If you commit to going to the main building, you might find out that they started doing shack, and that a gen is out of the popping. If you try to go for Shack, you might find out that they all spawn in main building and they just pop the gen in 30 seconds. It becomes really, really necessary to use your game sense and your intuition of spawns and any perk you may have to really figure out what they're doing and try to stop them before that happens. You need to commit to being in chase. You need to attempt to be in chase as soon as possible and as often as possible so that you can make sure that survivors keep going down. That is your strength in this map, that survivors don't have any crazy loops for the most part to run you around forever. That's the best part about it, that you should have relatively short chases and that you should be chaining them together. And if it takes you too long to find the first survivors, if they spread out too much, if you actually are run a little bit too much around some of the decently strong structures that can spawn here, sometimes some of them can be troublesome if you blunder and you don't get them out of the way quick. If your chases extend for too long, you might be in a situation where the final gens are just impossible to hold. Because the map is stretched out, if you get exit gates that are on opposite sides on the middle, that's great. If you get exit gates that are on opposite sides on the longer side, it's a complete nightmare. So again, you have lots of potential to have very close exit gates, or potential to have them completely worlds apart. Complete RNG on that. There's almost no way to predict what's going to happen. So maybe throughout the game, also keep an eye on exit gates. It might come to that. If you need to close hatch, or if it gets to endgame, you need to see how bad it is and what you're going to commit to. Stealth is powerful in this map. I would say that some killers benefit. This map is not necessarily horrible for any killer, but the sheer distance that you need to traverse will make the average slower killer have a hard time sometimes just traversing and getting to places. And I believe that's everything about the state residence or family residence. I think that's what it's called. But yeah, anything else to add to it? I guess that because it is a thin map, sometimes you can have situations where you can actually effectively bottleneck it. You can have a survivor on the ground, survivor on the hook, and then the other two survivors, because the map is thin, you can just stay at a vantage point, maybe in one of the little shrines that has a bit of elevation to see. The bottlenecking in this map is doable. So try to do a little bit of that and abuse that fact, if you will. Next up, we go to Grim Pantry. Grim Pantry is honestly... it's honestly an unpleasant map for many, many ways. Every single bad thing that we talked about the previous map is true for this one as well. This map has spawns around the edges for absolutely everything. Hatch can spawn anywhere around the edges. Bear traps can spawn anywhere around the edges. Pools of Devotion for play can spawn anywhere around the edges. So can totems and other props, which can sometimes make you think, well, if I bring a Hex totem, they might not find it. Wrong. Dead absolute wrong. They can spawn on the edges themselves. So a survivor can spawn looking at your Hex totem. Also, for some bizarre reason, this map near the middle has two trees or two rocks or two whatevers that have two totems that are almost always there for some reason. So it is extremely likely that one of your totems will be right there. So if you have a totem build, there is a really good chance that one of your totems is going to be on a billboard in the middle of the map, facing the middle or the side in a way that is very predictable and very easy for even beginner survivors to spot from afar. So I would say even that is not good about it. So we know the spawns are bad. We know the stealth and the options for the survivors to see you from afar, and the early game is difficult. Is there anything good about this map? Similarly to its sibling map, the Pale Rose, the Grim Pantry doesn't have a ton of palettes. It's not a map that has a ton of palettes, but there are still some of them that can be decently strong. And similarly to Pale Rose, which I think I neglected to mention, the RNG in this map can get a little bit ridiculous sometimes. In Pale Rose, you can have the ship with a log on the side that has a vault that can let a survivor go there from almost anywhere, safely vault, and then if you go around, they go into the main building. This can happen here as well. You can have corners of the map with generators that have a strong vault. You can have a strong middle or a middle that's completely barren. You can have generators that are in complete edges of the map, which are they're hard to find for survivors sometimes if they don't spawn there. because they're unpredictable, but they're also hard to defend for the killer because it's such a commitment. You can have I believe, 2 generators on the pier, which is a huge commitment of time. For the average killer to go around and climb the pier and go to the top, it's almost a waste of time. The shack is fairly centralized, which means that they can almost, always weasel their way in and out of it into something else. And we're not talking about the main building yet. The secondary building, I honestly think, is quite powerful. If he has a generator in it, it will start closed up, and if it has no generator, it will be open up by default. And this actually changes things quite a lot. But basically, I believe that when it's closed, you don't have as much access to it from the outside. And when it's open, you can, how do I put this? It's basically strong for survivors. As a side building, it's a fairly safe place for a survivor to be. You might be able to stalk them from very far away if you spot them, but if you see them from far away, as a general rule, almost with any killer, you will not be able to immediately go there and pressure them. If they can go into the main building, or if they're already into the side building, the little pantry, or if they're already there doing a generator and you go there, you will not down them immediately. You will not pressure them immediately. It's a big commitment. So it's a relatively safe structure. And then we've got the main building, which is honestly just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. It has a basement that can spawn there, or it can spawn in shack. The shack one, in my opinion, is pretty decent because it's centralized. This one here is a horrible thing. The basement in this building is horrible. It's hard to get into, but it's so hard to defend. It's such a mess. Finding the entrance to the basement is confusing. Finding the entrance to get in or out of this building is confusing. If you down a survivor in this main building, is what I'm trying to get at. Getting out of there and finding a hook is so difficult. For some reason, the hooks in this map are so scarce and so awkwardly placed. You can be in the middle of the map, pick up a survivor, and then you'll be like, okay, so the basement is here by shack, so there's no hooks outside. And there's one hook that's in the side building, inside, that I cannot get into easily because the staircase is on the other side. And then there's a hook that's there, that's close enough, but it's on a hill, and the hill is facing backwards. So even though the hook is there, I can't go there directly. I need to go around it. So there's so many combinations that will often completely screw you over. When you'll down a survivor and you'll notice that there's no good hook around it. No good hook around it. You will, if you're lucky, barely get to a hook after wasting almost 20 seconds, picking up almost 16 seconds of carrying and then hooking literally last second. So the hook spawns in this map might be the worst in the entire game. The main building is strong for survivors with pallets inside, pallets on the top side, outside, entrances from either side. Again, when they go into this main building, you will hear a bunch of crows fly up in the air. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Even if you know they're there and you go there, they have so many options to hide, so many lockers to hide in, so many places to tuck themselves into. They might have just gone by and then left. You don't even really have any real queue. A good survivor can run you here for a long time. If they have balanced landing or dead hard to extend the chase, you're going to really, really feel it because you're going to commit a long time, and then at some point they're just going to use their perk and gain even more distance or get to a pallet and drop it. It's really, really bad, and I almost never want to commit because nothing comes out of it. Nothing comes out of it. It's not particularly good to use the basement if you have it. It's not particularly, if they're in the middle inside and you down them, it's not particularly pleasant to hook them. If you down them on the outside or on the open part, it's a little bit easier to find a way out, but you might still have an awkward hook that's like behind a wall. It's honestly a huge waste of time, and I generally recommend that you avoid chasing in the main building unless you really know what you're doing, or unless you really know that something good is going to come out of it. A thoroughly unpleasant map for all the wrong reasons. I'm not even going to argue that it's a great map for survivors, because it's also very unpleasant for survivors in many, many ways. They can sometimes get a middle that has like 3 pallets, which are all safe, and they can play around on. Sometimes they can get a middle that's just filled with grass and literally nothing else. The edges of the map can have generators that are completely isolated, or that have a good structure around them. The exit gates on this map I would argue are actually pretty good for you, because the map is actually not that large, and the exegates spawn on particular spots. You know, the pier limits some of the spawns. The exegates can actually be quite good for the killer, and they can be easy to spot from like the center alone. So exegates might actually be a part of your comeback if you had a rough game here. But other than that, thoroughly unpleasant map. Some killers can benefit from this. From the top of my head, the wet floor of this map benefits the spirit a lot. She can hear steps really, really well. The powerful grass means that traps from the trapper can be really effective. Same with Hag. Some of the stealth killers can use the trees and cover to catch survivors off guard, which can work out. Some of the killers that have insane mobility, like Nurse for example, or that ignore loops, they don't mind this as much. I feel like there's not as many strong windows anymore as there used to be, but you will still suffer a lot. And this map, I would argue, has a few more pallets than Pale Rose. So be ready for that. And honestly, just try to identify the parts about this map that are really not worth playing around, and go out of your way to ignore them to find the most success, in my opinion. Forgive me. Next up, we're gonna go to one of the next farm maps, which is the Thompson House. I'm gonna need a drink, if you don't mind. We've been talking for a couple hours straight, forgive me. Thompson House, what's up with Thompson House? This map used to be absolutely ridiculous, and many people still regard it as completely disgusting. It has improved a lot since the rework, but you're still looking at a jungle gym of some kind next to the main building, next to another jungle gym of some kind with lots of pallets in between. The main building itself is not a crazy loop by itself. It has a basement that's actually deeper than usual. So it takes a long time to get out of. It can sometimes work in your favor. It has a hook that always spawns on the second floor. And even though there's more escapes out of the second floor, there's a hole, there's a stairs out, there's a window that leads out. There's only one way up, which is the staircase. So if you hook someone on the second floor of this, it can be sometimes more powerful than a basement. You hook someone there and then you put a trap on the staircase, or you remain around it. Survivors will have a really, really hard time getting up there to save their friend. So the main building itself, honestly, not too dangerous. The problem is what's around it. What's around it is often a combination of 2 to 3 pallets that are all pretty powerful, that are all relatively strong for survivors. Minus, obviously, a dead slinger can get hits here and there, you know, but for the average survivor that spawns around this house, the average pallet that spawns around this house is powerful. And then it links into other pallets that then link into jungle gyms. And this is a bit of a trend. This map links itself up quite well, and can honestly be pretty overwhelming. In the complete middle, you have a dead zone generator often, and again a combination of, I believe. Hold up. Let me just make sure I tell you this right. You're going to have, I believe, either a harvester. I'm saying this right. A harvester or a cow tree. And obviously, if you get the harvester, it's a lot more manageable. If you get the cow tree, you're in for a world of hurt, potentially. This will often be next to a gen, which is also a bit dead zone, but it doesn't matter because there will be another pallet and there will be a lot of corn. So as you approach it, you're going to miss on a lot of information. Survivors generally will find generators fast in this map. You necessarily might not find the correct generators where survivors are immediately. Then you've got a shack, which is in a corner of the map. It's a little bit by itself, but it's really painful because survivors will often carry you there. And now you're there and you're like, okay, dude, if I commit to this and I down this guy, now I'm going to be so far away from everything else, right? They'll do the gen there first and then try to do that. Or they'll leave the gen and try to do that generator last and still have a shack that's powerful to run you if you decide to go there. This shack often has a pallet next to it that links to another potential jungle gym or LT wall or structure of some kind. It's pretty powerful stuff. We're starting to get into maps that if the RNG is bad enough or the survivors are smart enough to realize it, you will be in a lot of trouble. You've got totem spawns that are very, very old, that survivors know very, very well. Sometimes that spawn in the middle of the map, which is not great for you. If you're a killer that benefits from being in the open, the corn will make this map difficult, and the main building will make it difficult. If you're the killer that benefits from line of sight blockage like Ghostface, you're not even in a particularly good spot, because survivors will see you and you will most likely not see them. They can also see you from the main building and call you out. They can also call you out in a number of ways. So it is tricky. No killer really benefits from the combination of like corn, buildings, and jungle gyms in this map. Luckily for you, it's not all bad. The main building itself is not a particularly strong loop. You do have a potentially good hook on the second floor that you can abuse. The main building, as I said, has a relatively consistent layout of gems, 1 in the main building and 2 on the sides, maybe 1 or 2 close by as well. So the 3 genning around main building, not a crazy idea. It can happen. Some killers can manage it if you manage to make an unhook difficult and make trades and eventually get someone killed. 3 survivors could have a tough time doing the final 3 gens around this area. However, if they stretch you all the way to Shack, if they stretch you all the way to the Combine or the Cow Tree, and you are constantly flying around like a headless chicken without really getting anything out of the way and without really stopping gems or getting hooks and getting someone killed early, this map, honestly, a really, really difficult one. And it goes to show it's not even the worst farm map. So we have a long way to go still. Fortunately, what has changed since the rework, the small rework that this map got some time ago, is that these tiles are not as nutty as they used to be. You used to have literal Cow Tree into literal Jungle Gym into literal Shack. Now the space between them is a little bit more shaky, and sometimes RNG is not entirely in their favor. They might just get some debris and some obstacles that don't really have the right pallets, and you will catch people in between here. And those corners and the edges of the map can be powerful for you to like bottleneck and try to defend. So that's what you have in your favor going into this map. Next one, we have the Ironworks of Misery. How big is this map? Let's see. It is the second largest Macmillan map. It's actually smaller by a little bit than Shelter Woods, but it is way worse than Shelter Woods. It does have a little bit of dead zones. If you know, there's a place where either the logs or the tower or the water tower spawns. That place around here, usually a bit of a dead zone. There's also another place around the map that this map has a few dead zones, but for the most part, the elements of the map, both jungle gyms, pallets, generators, like everything, is fairly spread out. So you will feel the distance of this map a lot more, and you can end up in difficult situations where gens are in one corner, another corner, opposite corner, with a middle building in the middle, blocking everything. So it is quite tough. The middle building was nerfed. There was an extremely powerful window that survivors can use and abuse forever, basically. But now it's been broken next to it, and there's a hole next to it. But then they buffed it again because they placed breakable walls, and now the top of the building has a breakable wall on a very strong window. Once you break the wall on the second floor of the building, that window is worthless. A survivor takes you there, you go through the wall, and you hit them quickly. However, you don't necessarily go to the second floor of this building by yourself because there's no gems or anything valuable up there. So it's very, very possible that in your first chase with a survivor in this place, they will run up to the second floor. And if they do that and they make it to the window, for the most part, unless you are hunters and you land a hatchet or something like that, for the most part, if they make it successfully, you will need to break that that breakable wall. Otherwise, that window is just way too powerful. So main building is usually, I believe, always has a generator in one of the corners of it. I believe there's 3 potential spawns in the main building. So the main building will always have a generator and will always have at least something. Something for the survivors to work with, some general safety. Another set of pallets will spawn on the edges, which are decent. In the context of looping this building, or in the context of coming from someone else and suddenly making it here, and now they drop the pallet, and if you break it, now they go into the building, rinse and repeat. Around this building, you'll have jungle gym, you'll have hills, you have more jungle gyms or LT walls or other structures. You will have sometimes safe pallets, sometimes you will have more debris and useless dead zone, but for the most part, it's pretty safe around it. Then you've got a long clearing that leads to shack, and next to shack, you've got another 2 structures next to each other. Next, on the other side, you've got some safe pallets in the middle, often safe pallets as well. Then you've got the other logs or tower, and then you've got the other tile. And this can be quite overwhelming. This can be very, very overwhelming. The generators can spawn basically anywhere around the edges. You rarely have 3 gens super close to each other on a corner, although it can happen. You are often looking at having multiple generators very far away. And the thing about each of these generators is that, except for maybe one or two of them, most of them are in very safe places. So you will very rarely chase a survivor who is in a gen who is in immediate danger. They will always have the shack next to them. They will be on a jungle gym next to another jungle gym. The center little clearing can have strong pallets as well. There's a lot going on in this map, and honestly, it can be a bit much. If the survivors run all of these things well enough, you would be hard pressed to make great progress in this map. Luckily for you, sometimes RNG is kind, and they get an L2 wall and an L2 wall, as opposed to 2 strong windows and 2 strong pallets, and that can work in your favor. You can also try to be smart and use the second floor as a stalking killer. You can use the second floor to stalk survivors at the start of the match. You can trap many, the main building has some tight entrances to it. You can trap them as certain killers, like Hag. There are things that you can do around this map. And the main building, as powerful as it is, we're not in the absolute ridiculous territory yet. It's very much still manageable, I would say. On top of this, is there anything else to say about this map? It's hard. Many of these generators are behind big structures, are behind lines of sight, are difficult to obtain sometimes. You will need to commit to checking some of the generators, and sometimes that will work out, and sometimes you will make mistakes, and the size itself of the map will punish you every time you're not actively chasing survivors. So it can be a little bit rough. But for the most part, you'll find that the average survivor luckily does not chain all of these things together and doesn't use the main building well. So for the most part, you'll realize that the average survivor luckily doesn't play this map to its full strength. But that's all there is to say, I believe, about the Ironworks of Misery. And so we go to Blood Lodge. Blood Lodge has been heavily reworked, and the rework has been a kindness to killers. This map used to be even more packed with safe pallets, but make no mistake, it's still pretty ridiculous. It's on the second lowest tier for a very good reason. This is an extremely open map, and it's not even a particularly small one either. I believe it's tied for the 4th biggest map. I'm checking the numbers right now. So it is a big, open map where the buildings are not in the center, blocking the view. The buildings are on the sides. The vehicles, again, there's 2 vehicles in this map, I believe. You will have either a truck, a bus, or a crane. Obviously, if you get a really strong bus with the center window and then a crane, then you're living the dream. And if you get a truck, then that's more manageable. But if you get the strong ones as a survivor, this map is just even more ridiculous. So it's a very big map, and it's a very open map. That already makes this horrible for half the killers. The average killer that needs to walk around gens has a really, really hard time navigating this map. Just getting to and from places. You may know that they're on a generator. It might not even be the best generator. They might not even be that well defended, but it doesn't matter. Just getting there takes a very, very long time. Spawns are kind for survivors. They can immediately spawn behind something and check throughout the map and see you from miles away. And let's talk about other killers, stealth killers. What the hell do you do in this map? What the hell do you do in this map? Anytime you go through the middle, you will be spotted by virtually every survivor in the map. Anytime you go around the edges, you're wasting further time on a map that's already very big. If you go around the edges trying to ambush a survivor and you find no one and they just happen to be on the other side, huge time wasted. Let's say that you do find someone though, and you're a little bit unlucky and they don't go down immediately. They will immediately bring themselves to the middle, where they will loop you. If you leave them be because it's the middle, just ignore them. There are generators in the middle, so they will continue to work on those generators that are fairly safe, while they keep an eye on you. And eventually, when those generators are gone, you will just have a middle part where they can anytime they are threatened from anywhere in the map, they can just go to the middle, where they will be relatively safe. Luckily, with the rework of this map, the middle is a little bit less ridiculous. You don't have pallet after 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 pallet into the shack. Now it's more like pallet after pallet after pallet after pallet in the shack. So it can be pretty bad, but it's not as horrible as it used to be. You get a few pallets, now they maybe get a truck instead of a crane, and okay, the middle is not as threatening anymore. You aren't really using your powers all that well. If you're a stealth killer, let's say, if you're a trapper, when are you ever going to place traps without being spotted? So you're probably not going to benefit hugely from your power, or any quirk of your killer, but it's not as horrible as it used to be. However, there are still things going on for this map. The shack, pretty damn strong, next to a tile, or pretty close to a tile. It can be used in conjunction with pallets near the middle. The shack is pretty nasty here. And it's also, I'm not gonna say extremely centered. It's not, but it's fairly off to a side of the map. Enough so that unless you have an amazing 3-gen around it, you will almost never benefit from hooking in the basement. If they have gems very far away, it will be a waste of your time. If you chase a survivor there and the gems are away, it will be a huge waste of your time. They will run you there for a long time, maybe even drop the pallet and link it into something else if they need to after you break it. And gems will be flying across the map. It is a very big map where holding forward and holding W really works out for survivors. It's really, really tough for the killers. The generators are easy to find. And even though some of them are somewhat defensible, the fact that you commit to one often leaves other ones exposed, and it's really, really hard to be everywhere on this map. Now let's get to the main building. The main building has been reworked, and arguably it's now stronger than before. There are two combinations of window, entrance, and breakable wall. And you'll either get one window boarded up and the other one open, with one entrance and one breakable wall, or the breakable wall and the entrance will be swapped, and then the windows will also be swapped, and the one that's boarded up will be open, and the one that is open will be boarded up. One of them is stronger than the other, but both of these are pretty good. If we're starting to get into the maps where the killer really needs to start thinking, what the hell is happening? Do I even want to be here? Asking existential questions. This is a really, really strong loop. If the killer runs around it, you will probably be able to block the window. With all the gaps in between, you can see the killer relatively well. And you can go around this window several times. The killer will most likely want to break the breakable wall that turns the window into not so much of an issue. But, drumroll, what happens when they do that? You have guaranteed pallets, as far as I know, I'm almost certain. You have guaranteed safe pallets around the main building now. So you can run main building, he can break wall, you can run main building a bit more, and then you can go to one of those pallets. And when he breaks one of those pallets, you can go to one of the jungle gyms or one of the structures that are next to it. It's pretty naughty. Luckily, this map hasn't been around too long, the rework version that is, so I don't feel like survivors run me there particularly often. It's really, really tough. You do not want to commit to this. A generator can be in the main building. I think it's almost always guaranteed to be, but don't quote me on that one. There's often a generator there, or at least near. So it's a reason to go there, but you generally don't want to commit to chases here. You're going to win or lose this game by chasing people elsewhere and not committing to shack and not committing to main building for too long if it seems like the survivors know what they're doing. So this is quite disgusting. Large map. Anything positive about it? The fact that it's so open lends itself well to some killers, such as Nurse. A Nurse in the middle of the map is totally good. Totally good, because she can see you fairly well, and you actually need to go to the edges where you'll find more line of sight structures to try to juke her. So some killers do not really suffer all that much from being in an open map. But still, you'll find that this is one of the tougher maps you can go to, and RNG plays a big part into it. Next up, we've got the Groaning Storehouse. And this can be such a sweet or sour map. Remarkable things about this map right from the get-go. You will notice that this map has a very odd and unusual shape, right? And there's this pocket on the side, and there's this other pocket on the side. It's very usual for you to spawn in the middle, and for survivors to be split up, either between one or the other, or both pockets. This already puts a lot of pressure on you. If you go to the wrong side of these pockets, and you go there and there's one survivor and he's hiding, you're not going to find them. You're not going to have time to get there. They'll see you coming, they'll hear you coming, they'll know where you're coming from, because, again, it's a very tight pocket. So they're going to hide. And let's say that there's one survivor hiding there, and the other 3 survivors are on the other one, and they just pop that gen immediately. What are you going to do? You're starting at a massive disadvantage. So the potential for you to mess up in this map at the start is tremendous. You could go for the other side, and it could be the reverse. You could go for one side and find 2 survivors, and then the other 2 survivors do that other generator. It's really, really tricky. And the worst part is that if they do these generators early, that's not even the worst. That if they do those generators early, that might actually be in your favor. If these generators are left for later, that's when the real pain can begin. Let's say that you have corrupt intervention, and these generators are blocked, and the survivors hide for a little bit, and eventually the game plays out, and you have a generator. The final 3 generator is in the middle building, and then in these pockets, 1 in each. Defending those generators is very, very difficult. Very, very tricky. So these gens and these spawns are hard for the killer. But that's probably not it's the most identifying factor of this map. The most unique part about it. This bottlenecking that you can do in this is not really that great. Because, you know, even if you have a survivor there and you bottleneck that part and try to prevent others from saving, they can always spread out to other gens. They can always come from one side, get them last second. So it's not really that much of an asset for you. It's more of an asset to survivors, in my opinion. You do have a shack that's fairly central, which can have the basement, and a building that's fairly central that can also have the basement. The building can face a number of ways. This shack is pretty good for survivors. They often can link into it from a pallet or 2, or from the structures that are nearby. So this is a very usable shack, and because it's one in the center, it's not one that you necessarily need to fear too much. If you go there, get rid of the pallet, maybe pressure a gen or 2, you're totally fine. It's not one of those horrible shacks that you honestly never want to step on. And if you get the basement there, or in the main building, basement's fairly centralized, so it actually is worth investing time in putting survivors in the basement if you think you're going to defend them. If you're not going to defend them, just hook them whatever you can as soon as possible and move on. But if you are invested in defending, the basements in this map are actually fairly legit. Problem with this map, other than the spawns. The middle building can honestly be nightmarish. I'll have some footage in the background, hopefully, that shows you just how bad it is. The average survivor, again, luckily doesn't understand how to run this building. But going through these 2 windows, it's just ridiculous. The 2 windows in the middle, you can just play them in tandem. It's ridiculous. The killer will have to break the breakable wall next to the window. And even then, it's still really, really, really powerful. So if you find the occasional survivor that is really, really good and knows what they're doing and runs these windows well, this main building is quite terrifying. And the worst part of it is that there's nothing stopping this main building from being close to other debris and smaller pallets around it. So often this will be a multi-hit combo in a long string of like blows to your face if a survivor is running this well. You can turn this to your advantage sometimes. If you're a trap-based killer, you can sometimes, trap the windows, if you're a stalking killer, you can stalk through some of the gaps in the building. It's not all horrible. Not every killer is defenseless against this, luckily. But the main building is tough. And it's also very, very big, which means that navigating around it is kind of tough. You will have gens around it. And sometimes going behind it to check if a gen is being done or to try to stop it will often rob you of a lot of information. If you go behind the main building, what the other survivors are doing, if they unhook, where they go, if they heal, where they do it, if they're doing a gen, where are they starting? All of those things you will miss out on. So this is a map where you're often going to be losing a lot of information if you decide to go a certain way, and you need to be very, very careful with that, knowing which areas maybe you don't even want to commit and which gens you might be ready to give up on. Other than that, it's a pretty generic Macmillan map, which means that the totems are generally well known. The structures are generally well understood. The jungle gyms are all pretty normal. You can sometimes get luckier or not so lucky. I would say the exit gates are also a little bit 50-50, where you can get 2 good ones or you can get 2 impossible ones on very, very very distant edges. So try to win this game in the mid game and in the early game by making the right decisions, and don't try to clutch this map late game, because it will be very hard. It will get massively harder as you go on. Next time is the Temple of Purgation. The Temple of Purgation is actually I believe they shrunk it a little bit. It's not as big as it used to be, but the thing you got to understand about it is that there's a lot of underground ground below it. Forgive me. There's a lot of underground basement, so there's actually a little bit more to it than you realize. But it's not that big. It's not that incredibly big. You have an incredibly large building in the middle that takes up a lot of space. A fairly spread out amount of jungle gyms and structures. Some ruins in the front, some ruins in the back. The ruins in the front are generally stronger. They usually have a pallet that can be pretty strong. The ruins in the back are a little bit smaller and a little bit weaker. What is the problem with this map? It's still pretty large. It still takes a little bit of time to go from anywhere to anywhere. And the bigger problem with it are the safety of the pallets that you can get. That's the main issue. You can have a middle of the map in front of the temple that has a safe pallet into a safe pallet into the ruins with a safe pallet into a gen that has a rock with a relatively safe pallet not too far from Shag, which has obviously has a safe pallet and a safe window and everything. Apart from some occasional dead zones, you also get this really strong tiles that have a window on the side that can sometimes lead to other strong tiles to other strong small loops with pallets. It can be quite rough. I personally deal with this map outright because it also has some weaknesses that survivors don't always realize. The second floor of the bottom floor of the temple is actually not too great for them. If the basement spawns there, it's very easy to get in, very hard to get out. You can get in through the main temple, or you can get in through the hole that's directly above the basement. So almost, if you're in the center, it's very easy to get a survivor in the basement, and if you're one of the killers that can defend basement well, this can spell doom for survivors very, very early. Even if you don't have basement, you can put someone in the guaranteed hook that spawns in the bottom floor of the temple. There used to be 2 of them, but now one of them never spawns anymore. I think it might be a glitch, so we'll see if that gets fixed. But there's always one guaranteed hook at the very back of the temple bottom floor. And if you put someone there, that person's going to have a really hard time coming out. You can come in from a number of ways. They can only come out through 2 stairways that literally connect to each other at the top. So as a killer, you can use this to your advantage a lot. The temple itself is actually quite strong. There are some drops that can be used for balanced landing users really, really well. Even if you don't have balanced landing, there are some vaults where you can go really quickly, drop outside of temple, and the killer cannot really follow you very quickly, so they'll have to take one of the open sides. So yeah, the temple itself is quite alright. here's the thing that's really interesting. When you complete the generator inside the temple doors open, and this makes the top, the ground floor of the temple way worse because the doors open. Now, if you vault one of those windows, the killer can just go through the open door and hit you immediately. So you want to use these vaults before doing this generator in the bottom of the temple. On the flip side, though, when you complete the generator in the temple, the doors do open, but so do the doors on the bottom floor. And when you open these doors, some good things happen. For once, you unlock an extra chest. This map has always one extra chest than usual, so there's a chest there if you wanna have that. And also a pallet that was not accessible before now becomes a pretty good pallet. Obviously, a killer is not really committed to chasing you here. If a generator is already done, he might not chase you. But this pallet here becomes pretty damn good. And even this other pallet that is usually not very good, now you can loop around it and you can force it to be good. This other pallet, however, that's next to the generator, this pallet is worthless. Don't ever bother. So overall, a big map that's difficult to navigate for the average killer, that can potentially, this is the word, potentially have insane loops that are really hard for the average killer, that most people don't know how to play right. Actually, that I would say that even the average player can use this really well. I would say that. Luckily, the average player does not understand the main building so well, so hopefully you can use that as a threat and put people in the basement or a fake basement as you see fit. Potentially a very tough map. But actually, personally, I'm not as afraid of it as some of the other ones. Next up, a map that actually does rustle my Genius quite a lot and that does scare me and, you know, makes me have nightmares. This is the second map of the Crotos Print Asylum. It is the Disturbed Ward. This map, I think, is perhaps the only map in the game where I still get lost, and I am very embarrassed. I wish I could keep this to myself, but full disclosure, I still don't know where I am in this map at any given time. The building itself rotates, and the outside of the outer perimeter of this map is a mess. It's not a completely square map. It actually has some edges, but it's still the third largest map in the game. Generators in this map have actual restraining orders against each other. When you spawn as a killer, take a minute to look around. Don't take a minute, you're gonna lose. Take 3 seconds to look around the map and look at the generators. You'll notice that there's a generator on the corner of your screen, and there's another one over there, and then one on you, and then another one extremely far away from you. The generators are so far apart from each other. And to top it all off, you have a center building that is just insane. It's just insane. Luckily, with the rework that's coming up next month, the center building is going to be a little bit more manageable. They've opened up a lot of paths. It still seems like it has the same amount of pallets and stuff. We'll get into that. But they've opened it a lot. It will take a little while to learn it, but it seems a lot more friendly for a killer right now. But until that happens, I'm gonna tell you how it is right now. The main building right now is a travesty, is a monstrosity. It has entrances from basically any side, some of which are windows that you can vault safely. It has ways to get out, windows also that you can vault safely. It used to have 4 pallets, which was a nightmare. Now it only has 2 pallets. One of the pallets is always on the bottom. One of the pallets is always on the top floor. The one on the top floor has a small chance to being in the place where you can walk around it. So sometimes the one on the top floor can be a useless pallet. Let me give you a little cue. If you see that this pallet is on the side where the lamps are hanging on the wall and not hanging from the top, this is when you can go around it and hit around it. So the pallet is not very good. But if you see that the pallet is on the spot where there's hanging light bulbs, that means there's a hole below you. There's a hole on the side, and that is a good pallet. So the pallet up top has a small chance of not being the best, but it's still a decent pallet. The one on the bottom is always really, really, really good and has a chance to actually be tremendously powerful, especially if it's right here by the entrance. So these pallets, at the very least, are great, and at worst are insanely powerful. And even without the pallets, this building is really good. You have windows that you can go around a lot. There are exits out. There are drops for balance landing users. There are lockers to hide in if you outsmart the killer. Fortunately for you as a killer, this is a building that's actually fixed for the most part. There is a window that can switch places, but for the most part, even though it looks very confusing, the rooms are always the same. So if you're very experienced, you can take a little bit of time to learn where the drops are and learn some smart things to play around careless survivors. If the survivors are playing smart, though, forget about it. If you make one tiny misstep, they will make tons of distance on you. But on the flip side, at the very least, right now, you can try to learn this building and play around it by experience and by learning every room, because as I said, they do not really change or shift within the building, which is the only saving grace of this building. Don't learn it too much, however, because as I said, next month or so, we're going to have this building reworked. So we'll have to learn that instead. Although it doesn't seem too different, it's been opened up a little bit. And it does look a little prettier. So you have generators that are spread out insanely well. A main building that is troublesome by itself and also often is the final resort of a survivor after they take a hit. After a survivor takes a hit from anywhere, they will often run into the main building. And then you've got a shack that is, it's fairly isolated, but it's also in a complete corner of the map. So this is the kind of shack where if you hook someone here, you almost have nothing to defend. You're really not exerting pressure across anything. So hooking here can be a huge waste of time. Again, there are exceptions. A Freddy can hook there and teleport back, or a Demogorgon. I understand there's exceptions, but as a general rule, hooking here gives you very, very little. Achieves very, very little. Chasing someone here for a long time also achieves very little. Even though there's not a ton of jungle gyms, they are often stacked next to each other. And this map is just painful. There is also a quality to it that there's so many things about it that are difficult. Finding gens is relatively easy for the survivors. They do get lost a little bit as well because the map looks all the same around the building. But the generators are relatively easy for the survivors to find, especially at the start. They do not really have a hard time finding them like in indoor maps. So the generators will be done fast. And because they're done in so distant places, they will be done fast throughout the match, and there will be it will be very hard for you to pressure many of them at once, is what I'm getting at. So that is very, very tough already. But on top of that, this map has a quality to it that is really hard to describe. There are maps that are so small that survivors, no matter where they go, no matter how much they hold forward, you're always going to catch up to them, and you're going to corner them against a wall of the map very quickly. And then there's maps that are very empty, right? So if you're chasing a survivor in a certain jungle gym or a certain pallet, and they step away from it after you break it, let's say, you will catch up to them before they make it somewhere else, because the map has so many dead zones. This map has a very nasty density and spread of pallets and tiles everywhere. This is the absolute worst map to try to catch a survivor that's just pre-dropping pallets. Let's say you're playing Legion, all right? And you injure a survivor, you cancel your power, and now you just chase them. And every time they get to a pallet, they're almost all safe pallets. I don't think is there any unsafe pallet in this map? Very few exceptions, I'm sure, but almost every pallet is safe. So if you chase a survivor that's just dropping a pallet, then you break it. You can't play around it really, so you break it. And then go to the next one. You're not going to catch them immediately because it's a big map, right? But here's the thing. You're going to catch up, 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 and right about as you catch up, they get to another pallet. And the distance between these pallets is almost devilishly calculated, because if it was any longer, you would catch them. And if it was any shorter, then you would get there quicker and at least get the next pallet out of the way faster, right? And they would need to either camp the pallet or start looping. But it almost feels like the distance between the pallets in this map is made in such a way that survivors have the absolute easiest time just linking pallet to pallet to pallet to pallet, giving you an absolute nightmare. If you need to seal the deal with a survivor, please, for the love of Christ, use your best mind games and play at the top of your game. If you turn your brain off and just go on autopilot, you will be there 16 pallets later wondering where the, where is your down? Why is this man not going down? So please play this extremely smart. The fact that you do not find survivors easily, the fact that survivors spread out as they spawn a lot, the fact that they can see you in a number of ways, the fact that the building in the middle is blocking your way many times means that you do not have great line of sight at the start. It means that you need to commit to a direction, and if you make the wrong call, you could lose a gen immediately, almost a few seconds into the game on the opposite end. So very, very tough map. Your best chance to win it here is to know the main building intimately well. You can't commit to it if you think you'll get out of something. Don't commit to it otherwise. Some people tell you, don't go to the main building. Sometimes going to the main building can work out. Because the main building has a gen that can sometimes be close to other gens that will often be part of a 3-gen. And the 3-gen here is very, very fickle, very, very fragile, but it is something. So don't be too afraid of the main building. If you want to do well on this map as a killer, know the inside out of the main building really, really well. Mind game your way out of every tile that you can on the outer edges of the map. And be very aware that you need to get someone out of the game as soon as possible. For the survivor side, I would advise know the building really well. Don't be greedy, don't go down, just drop pallets. Drop pallets, drop pallets, drop pallets. The killer, if you do not let them get it down, they'll have nothing going on for them. By the time you run out of pallets, the killer literally cannot do anything. Next up, we're going to go to the last of this tier, Ormond. And man, it makes me happy to see Ormond here. Ormond has come a long way since its rework. It is a difficult map. We're going to get into all the reasons why in a sec. But it is not like one of the absolute worst maps in the game anymore. It probably, this could have been easily the worst or second worst map a little while ago. But as I said, it got reworked recently. So, we'll talk about some of the things that are better about Ormond right now and some of the things that are still troublesome. Ormond is big. It's pretty big. Looking at it here, you would be fooled. It's apparently tied for the 8th biggest map in the game. Let me tell you right now, it doesn't feel that way. It is a very big map. And one of the reasons why it is big and it feels big is because things are not, unlike Shelter Woods, the edges have a lot of stuff. One of the edges has a shack. One of the other edges has, has a jungle gym. Another one has a jungle gym. The middle has a big building. And then the other one, it's a bit more of a dead zone. There will probably be a generator, but it's not too far from a jungle gym either. Or some other structure. So this map is well packed with fun. It has a guaranteed crane spawn of sorts. It's like a digger, snow plowing machine. And there's something really curious about the sides of the main building. And it's that you have the snow machine that has a pallet that then links to another pallet that then links to another pallet that then often links to another pallet. And this seems oddly consistent. And I don't know. Is this a great thing? The pallets themselves may not be the absolute strongest thing in the world. They're not like old Ormond pallets. Old Ormond pallets, honestly, were incredibly big structures, incredibly big bulky rocks with a pallet in the middle, and no matter which side you went, it was super safe. Now you need to think about it a bit more. So if you're playing a killer and you mind game a little bit, you can get a hit. If the survivor gets greedy or there's a laggy hit, you will get a hit. If you have a killer that has a ranged attack, you might get hits as well with these pallets, which is good. Although it will still be really painful. If it's a healthy survivor and you just want to get them with your Chenso as a hillbilly, they're just going to drop pallet, the next one then drop pallets, so be very, very careful. As a hillbilly, as a cannibal, and so on. On just taking pallets because they have a lot to give. On the opposite side, a similar phenomenon occurs, and you have a safe pallet into a safe pallet into a somewhat, I wouldn't say completely safe pallet, but you got pallet into pallet into pallet. Sometimes with, actually, every time now. Yeah, the building doesn't change directions anymore. Actually, the building will always have a window there, often, for you to, often, I think it's always there, but forgive me if I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, a window will often be there at least to take, and this can also lead into shack further on. So you got some stuff to work with. The map is very big, the gens are very spread out. The main building is fairly strong. with at least a couple pallets that you will need to break, and that survivors will hang on, hopefully as much as they can, and drop when they need to stay up. So it is tough. It is tough. The jungle gyms can be connected sometimes to smaller pallets, and depending on the RNG, you can still get a really rough map. You can get a decently strong jungle gym with a window directly pointing at a small rock pallet. And for the average killer, this is really hard to deal with. Really hard to deal with. Sometimes you do need to mind game. Sometimes you need to turn your brain off and realize that you just need to get that pallet out of the way. And it's, you need to use your judgment to know when to do what. You also need your judgment to know which gens to commit to. 3-genning on the shack side is now a possibility. Gens are a little bit closer to each other now, which would have been a dream before. As long as you get rid of some pallets, it's not a crazy idea, but it's still a very large map where survivors often start spread out, where they have plenty of chances to stealth you at the start and start in a good position. If you're one of the killers that manages distance well, like Blight or Billy, and you can actually go, you might not mind the size of the map as well. And the fact that some of the pallets now are not so strong, there's one of the pallets in particular in the front of the building that's like super weak, you will appreciate this, and the distance will not be... My stomach's making weird noises, forgive me. The distance might not be as big of a deal, but it's still a difficult map. It's still a map that is large, that is very spread out, where stealth killers don't really have much of a chance because they're not generally very slow, and where RNG can be cruel. The basement in the shack is not the greatest. The basement in the middle has plenty of space and escaping options. I wouldn't say basement is the most. Obviously, some killers benefit from it. Don't take this with a grain of salt. But basement is not the saving grace of this map at all. But yeah, the thing, you really don't have anything amazing going for you in this map. Everything is basically mediocre. The size is mediocre. The gen spread is pretty bad. Totems are not. They can be a bit nasty, but they're not anything super crazy. So yeah, play a good killer and hope for the best RNG, and this map should be manageable. But still, quite a rough one. You will be relieved though if you play the old Ormond to play the new one. Yeah, in my opinion. Next one. Next time we're going to the tier of maps that are in the absolute most cursed tier, the most survivor-sided. And I honestly wish I could say that they're survivor-sided for all the right reasons, but these maps are truly despicable. They honestly could all star in their own film as villains, and it's not even funny. You'll notice that there's only one Badham map in this mix. I've decided to condense all the Badham maps into one. If you don't know, Badham, for some very unusual reason, has 5 variations. There's Badham, what is it called? The Badham Preschool 1, the number 2, it's in Roman numbers, 3, 4, 5. This is basically the same map rearranged in different ways. There is a notable difference between them. The first one is more compact. The fourth one, for example, is more stretched out. In Badham number 3, you have a little bit of space behind the school. That's mostly like empty and dead zone-ish. In Badham number 5, it's similar, but the space moves. Sometimes the space is on the other side of the school. It all shifts a little bit, but you have the and honestly, there are some better and worse ones. Personally, if I had to guess, I'm gonna go ahead and say that maybe the first one is the most killer friendly. The first one and the third one I seem to like best. Whereas the second and the fourth and the fifth I'm a lot more scared of. The fourth one is the one that stretches out the most and seems to be the scariest. But it's hard to classify them, and they have a lot more things in common than they do in difference. So let me tell you about what they have in common. These maps are at the time, I believe these maps, according to the stats that I've been able to gather, are some of the least killer friendly in terms of stats at the moment. And there's very good reason for it. These maps have, let me count. 1, the main building, the school. 2, the second-story house. 3, the basement house, which people call the House of Pain. We'll see why in a second. And 4, the shack, which inevitably spawns in every single one of these maps. So you have 4 buildings that are all pretty strong by themselves, that are not necessarily very far from each other, that have a relatively high amount of interconnecting pallets between them, with sometimes, differing amounts of fences and windows and walls between them. How bad can it be? Extremely bad. Let me check their sizes. The Badham maps are some of the smallest in the game. They're not really the smallest, but they're not among the biggest either. The smallest map, like Coal Tower, has 132 square tiles, which in meters is like 8,000, a little over 8,000 square kilometers. And this is just a little bit above that, right? But here's the problem. As we said at the beginning of the video, one thing is the actual size of the map, and the other one is the relative size. If going to a little part of the map results in you having to go around a fence 600 times, and then around the house 600 times, and then catching a survivor finally, that makes that map that is not as big actually feel several times bigger. And that's exactly what happens with this. Each building is in itself a small nightmare. And fortunately for you, as a killer, the average survivor does not know it or run it very well. But it has been very illuminating to me to see how a good survivor runs these buildings and just how troublesome they are. Let's get started by shack. Shack always spawns in each of these maps. It's often a shack that's largely by itself, and that usually has a generator inside it or near it, which is a nice place of safety for survivors. They can do a generator there, and if you chase them, they have a decently good starting point where they'll stall for time, and then take a hit and go elsewhere, or eventually drop the pallet and go elsewhere. And even though it is largely by itself in all the maps, this shack is often powerful enough and has some pallets around it, enough to make it quite troublesome by itself. Sometimes ridiculously so. Sometimes you can have a window of a shack facing a pretty strong pallet that will really give a lot of oxygen to a survivor that's there. So shack by itself, very, very powerful, and somehow maybe the least troublesome part of this of these maps. These maps have a tendency to have a lot of pallets that are largely supposedly largely unsafe, but in practice they play out to be quite safe. If the survivor pre-drops the pallet, they can often if they don't try to be too smart, they can often get a lot of mileage out of them, which will be troublesome. Next up, we've got the 2-story building house. The top of the house, let's start about the second floor. The second floor usually can, there will be a generator in this house for the most part, and it's going to be either on the top or the bottom floor. The one on the top floor will obviously attract survivors there, and you're going to chase survivors here quite often. The second floor of this house is not that big of a deal. There's 2 windows. If survivors choose to vault the window immediately, they can make some distance as you chase them. If survivors opt to play around the pallet in this top floor, you can often mind game a hit. This is obviously, in my opinion, the best kind of place. If you play it smart, you can get away. If you mess up, you'll take a hit. This is totally fine, but it's still a place where they can potentially stall for time. The problem, more often than not, comes with the bottom floor of this building. The bottom floor of this building has 4 windows, and all of them except one will be open, and there will be a breakable wall on to help you deal with it. This is ridiculous. I have seen a very good survivor and a very good killer have a go at each other, and the survivor can go through the window like 3 times if the killer doesn't break the wall. If the survivors play this well, you have to break this wall. And what happens after you break the wall is that they can keep running you for a little bit, and then they can either go to the top floor, which we already discussed, or they can come to the front where they have a relatively safe pallet as well, which again they can use to stall. And after they use this pallet for stall, they can go to the top floor if they didn't do that already. And after you break that pallet, they can go to the next building. And they can chain it with the next thing. What is the next building? The next building is the basement building. The so-called House of Pain. And this house is just disgusting. Again, it has two components to it, and both are really strong. You can play around the top floor. If the windows are right, you can play around the top floor and just loop the killer on the top floor. Just loop the killer. The fact that you can vault quicker than them and that you round everything tighter than them will make the killer have to go around a lot. And depending on the configuration that you get, the killer will want to break a breakable wall to even catch you on the top floor. And the best part is that that's just on the top floor. When you're threatened, you can also threaten to go into the top floor. Today I run who did I run? I ran an Oni with his power on this house for like his entire duration of the power. And he never even came close to touching me. Never even came close. Despite bloodlust, despite everything, this house can be so disgusting. It's like a Rubik Cube of torture. It doesn't matter where you spin it, and it doesn't matter how you run it almost. Nothing comes out of it that is good for you as a killer. You want to get rid of that pallet down there as soon as possible. Depending on the breakable wall and how the survivor runs it, you want to break it. And it's just a huge amount of pain. A generator will be in this house in the basement in one of a couple locations. And survivors will be here. Either to loop you and waste your time if there's no generator, or to do the generator if it's not done yet. So the fact that you are somewhat forced to come here at times is just cruel. Luckily, I can tell you already, this should be a huge relief. The average survivor has no idea how to run this house well. And you will down them, you will mind them, or you will use your power in some creative way to seal the deal. But if you go against survivors that know what they're doing, God help you, this house truly is the House of Pain. And it's very, very disgusting. And it's only one of many pieces of this Badham puzzle. So yeah, good luck with that. The location of the House of Pain and the double-story house can switch around. So in any of the 5 maps, you'll notice that where the house is with 2 floors could be the basement, and the other way around as well. So keep that in mind. It might help you. It might help you understand that they're not always in the same spot. You don't always find them in the same place. They have 2 to choose from in each map. And then we've got the main building, the main school building. They have added breakable walls to this, which makes it a bit more bearable for killer, but it's still really, really bad. Some things that you have going on in this map, because of this main building. Let's go over the positives of this building. There are 2, without breaking any breakable walls, there are only 2 ways into this building and 2 ways out of this building. Right? If you happen to have the basement here, this can be tremendously powerful for you. If you hook a survivor in this basement, which in most Badham maps is not that far from the center. In fact, in the first Badham is pretty centered, for example. So if you hook someone here, you will be able to go through the hole and defend this basement quite well. And they will have a really hard time going in and an even tougher time coming out. So a trapper could make this basement the strongest basement in the game. You could put a couple traps that really lock this place down. And it could be virtually impossible for survivors to actually get in. If you have enough add-ons and you have enough prep, you can make this an inescapable place for survivors. Even if you don't have the basement, with both breakable walls here, a survivor that's in this part of the map by the boiler, room thingy, they can't really escape too much. They can loop you around for time, but they don't have a place where they can just hold forward. So they're a little bit trapped. But here's where the problems begin. That also applies to you. If you're not a survivor by this boiler room and there's no basement, where do you hook them? Sometimes the hooks around the school are not where you want them to be, and you might be forced to break breakable walls just to hook people. And even if and all of this takes a lot of time, and this is what this main building is. This main building is not a place where a survivor runs you forever, like in the House of Pain. It's a building where the survivor wastes your time for a very long time. There's always 2 pallets in this main building, and similarly to other maps, you always have one up top and always one down below, and there's 2 spots for each. So at a glance, you can look at one pallet, and if you see it there, you'll know that it's there, and if you don't see it there, it's on the other side on that floor. And the same way for the other. You take a glance at one of them, you see the pallet, great, it's there. If it's not there, it's on the other. These two pallets are extremely safe. Extremely safe. If you play around them or drop them at the right time, the killer wants to realistically break them pretty much as soon as possible. If the walls of the map have been broken, they are even better. Because you can, as they break them, you can just leave through the broken, breakable walls. If the walls are not broken, then they're not as strong because the survivor, after you break it, might still be a little bit cornered in the map. But still, they are great time wasters. Particularly the ones on the bottom, you really cannot get hits on at all. Unless you have some really exotic killer power that can do some things like Pyramid Head, can hit through walls and stuff. So, for the most part, very safe, great time wasters for survivor. Another thing that you need to keep in mind in this building is what's around it, because often what will happen is that you're chasing around it and they go inside, or they're inside and and then you chase them around them. Outside of this building, you have a relatively strong window that survivors can take to go around and make it to the other side of the building, and you have two pallets that will. You have 3 pallet spawns actually. And 2 of them, I think, almost always are there. If not all 3, I'm not sure if all 3 can spawn at the same time. And there are these cars where, you have a good chance to hit a survivor if they misplay it. But the survivors, at the very least, in the tiles around the school, will waste your time for a long painful time. And then let's say that you do down them, and then you do put them on the hook. Now what? Now what? You see a building in the distance, do you want to go there? And then find out that one of these survivors is going to loop it the way I just told you? What if you go down and there's no one there? The House of Pain has a generator that, because of sound occlusion, is very hard to hear from outside. So you can hear nothing, get very close, and then hear the gen nearly done. Or hear nothing, think that there's someone there, go there, and find that the gen is deserted. And now the other gens are being done across the map. It is a really, really, really rough map. A really, really rough map with very, very few saving graces. I will tell you some about I will tell you something else that's good about this map, apart from that basement that we talked about. This map has a lot of walls and line of sight blockers, which for some killers can be quite good. You don't need to worry about looping too much if you're a ghost face and you constantly stalk people and catch them off guard and constantly keep them injured and constantly insta-down them by surprising them and ambushing them. Same with Wraith. If you're a killer that has Tinkerer, you can get very, very, very close to a survivor and break a wall next to them and immediately get them down, or hit them through a wall with Pyramid Head and Tinkerer. That works great in this map. So there's a lot of things that stealth killers or killers with stealth perks can pull off in this map, which is great. Because there's so many fences, some of them are quite nasty, by the way. A killer like Hag can put traps in places that are huge choke points for survivors. A few traps in this map will cover like 90% of what every survivor goes through around the map. So these are powerful maps for Hag, despite despite the strong loops, because she doesn't care so much about those. So there are some saving graces to this map, but very, very few, and far in between. Survivors, if they're smart, they know that gens typically spawn on the same buildings, on the same places that are easy to find. So smart survivors should have no trouble finding gens immediately. You shouldn't have trouble either, but the spawns can be quite tricky. So yeah, good luck going to these maps, which I believe right now are the hardest map for a killer in general, according to the stats. Next up, we have a great ancient evil, which has been improved when they did a volley of map reworks and resizing a little bit, but that's still pretty fiendish, and that is the Run Fields. Run Fields are... It's an uninspired, ugly map that has a shack in the center, which is completely isolated. Nothing next to it, nothing even close to it, basically. And then a bunch of stuff on the edges. It is how big is it? It's one of the larger maps in the game, and because things are fairly by the edges, and the middle is basically just corn everywhere around shack, it's quite ugly. It's also got some characteristics that set it apart from other farm maps. Instead of having, one harvester or one harvester and one cow tree. This map always has 2 harvesters and 1 cow tree, the location of which can swap around. And this is good. This is really good for the survivors. They can use this really well. They often can link these with other small pallets that lead into structures and jungle gyms. So this gives them a lot of stuff to do, and it also makes their vision over corn even better because they can, sometimes get on the harvester and see you from afar and stuff like that. So this has this is also the only farm map that has 3 jungle gyms instead of 2. Most other maps in the farm, I believe all of them, if I'm correct, my sources are right, every other map has 2 jungle gyms with pallet and window, and everything else is LT wall or the short wall, long wall, pallet. This one has stronger structures. They are pretty far apart from each other, but they are stronger structures that you need to deal with. Sometimes these structures do have good connecting pallets around them, which can be a bit of a pain, and this is where RNG comes in, and where sometimes you can get some nasty setups, and you need to be careful around them. Luckily, the map is a little bit smaller than it used to be, and there's no jungle gym into jungle gym directly or anything too crazy like that. Thank goodness. The only redeeming factor about this map is that the good stuff is generally slightly spaced out, and then there's a lot of dead space in the middle that sometimes as a killer you can use. If you're playing Hillbilly, you can use this dead space, this whole dead zone, to cover the map quickly and get to point A to point B relatively quickly. However, the corn does not help. The totem spawns are entirely predictable and often in the open. This map, in my opinion, has the absolute most naked generators in the game. The gen immediacy is ridiculous. When you spawn in this map, take a minute as a survivor. You can actually take a minute as a survivor to look around. You will see a gen next to you. A gen in the distance, because you see the little flagpole with the lights. A gen in the distance again. And then another gen over there. And you'll know already, because the map is so predictable, that you are in this corner and that the other 2 gens that you don't see are over there and over there. That's it. That's it. There's 3 gens left. Doesn't matter. Go look around. You're going to see lights up, lights up. You know that gen is there. You will never have to go to a place on the map being like, oh, is this gen done? Damn, this gen is done. You will see everything and you will hop on gens immediately. Even with corrupt intervention, even with discordance, even with all the perks that killers often use to stop survivors from finding gens quickly, survivors will find generators very quickly and will be on generators very quickly. So it really is in your best interest to never assume that survivors are going to take a little while doing chests or whatever, because they're going to spawn next to or in plain sight in front of those generators. So that alone makes this a really dangerous map, even for beginners. Because trust me, some of the maps that we saw earlier, they only really shine when really good survivors are in them. You put 4 insane survivors in Badham that we just discussed, you're going to have a horrible time. You put 4 average survivors or even bad survivors in Badham, they can't do anything too special there. They just don't know. They don't have the know-how. 4 horrible survivors, as long as they can hit skill checks, can be extremely powerful in this map. Because they all spawn, they all get on a gen, now you chase one of them, and if you make just the slightest blunder and you take a little bit too long, that's 3 gens that you're lost and you're never getting back. So even really bad survivors can play completely fine in this map because they'll take 0 time getting to a gen and doing what equalizes survivors, which is just holding them one. Everyone can do it at the same speed, right? So for the most part, this is a map that you should be afraid of, no matter your opponents. The fact that it's such an open map also makes predicting survivors' paths really difficult. Are they going to go in a straight line? Are they going to go around? Hag has a bit of a hard time. This is one of the few maps where it's actually kind of tricky to predict where survivors are going to be and how they're going to see you. And many killers that rely on visibility as well, even though it's a relatively open map, the core makes it really, really tricky. So you will find that many killers are not particularly comfortable here. Ghostface, stealth killers in general, you really cannot afford to stealth around this map too much. As I said, gens are being done quick, so please rely on your perks to know where to go, and don't get too crazy trying to waste time anywhere else. The shack itself has the only basement possible, so the basement is fairly central. This is a good thing. For the most part, if you hook someone in the basement here and you are revolving around the center, you're going to have an easy time defending it. This also means, however, that they can escape in any direction. And if you are chasing a survivor around the shack and you're not really catching them and they extend their chase for a little bit too long, by the time you down them, generators are going to be done very, very far away. It might be possible that you hook the survivor in the basement, and then by the time you're coming out, it's jump up, jump up, jump up, and then they don't come for it, jump up, and now they're all out. And they let that guy to die, but everybody else lives. Or they come in last second with adrenaline, decisive, unbreakable, whatever, and they all make it. So even getting into the basement here can be a bit of an issue. Be very, very, very careful. That's about it for Rotten Fields. There's not a lot else to say about it. It's a simple evil map. Now we go to a more advanced kind of evil. Next up is the Red Forest actual map name called Mother's Dwelling. Mother's Dwelling is the largest map in the game. And I really, by a little while, it is the biggest map in the game. And I really wish I could tell you that it's very big, but the elements of the map, the gen spread, the tiles are all central. Nope. They're all really spread out. Much like in other maps, but unlike any other map, this is spread out on an already very large map. So what this means is that you can have generators on one end that will be so far from each other. I'm pretty sure that there will be generators that, you know, if a survivor starts working on it with another survivor, by the time you get there, they're basically done already from your spawning point or your starting point. So the size of this map cannot be understated. It is tremendously big. One of the corners has a shack. One of the other corners has a decently strong structure. One of the other corners has a decently strong structure. And the other corner is a bit, it's not as populated, it's not as big, but also has stuff around it. And then you have a secondary building close to the middle. That can be a decent time waster with no breakable walls because it's an older map to make it more palatable. No breakable walls. And then a middle building that has a lot going for it. It can have it has pallets around the edges, drops on the top for any balance landing users. It has a generator that always spawns on the top. Survivors can work on it, and unless you're a range killer, for the most part, you need to go quite a long way around to get to them. Once you get to them, they can immediately drop down with balance landing and just disappear. Also, as you drop, they have a way to get down without making any noise. So if I go through the building and I check on the generator, and I know there was a Nia there, it's possible that the Nia is hiding in a corner, so I need to check for corners. It's possible that the Nia fell with balanced landing, made no noise, and disappeared, so I need to look around. And it's also possible that the Nia just dropped on the little rock that's next to the generator, and then like slid around the rock, which makes you drop without making a screaming or gasping noise. So for that reason, this generator is hard to defend. Once you get there, you need to explore every possibility. Survivors have a number of ways to, outplay you there. Then there's the windows that spawn in the building, which go from strong to very strong. The basement can't get there, so sometimes that can be easier to defend. Some killers can make use of it, but it's not even guaranteed. The basement could also be in the shack, which is in a hugely isolated corner, which would be really bad for you to try to defend. As I said, the windows can be from bad to really, really bad for you as a killer. There are some options and some attempts to mind game here, but smart survivors will play it well. And the pallets around it only complement the looping around this building. Is it the strongest building in the game? No. But for a map that's already this big, you will feel it. And if a chase takes a little bit too long, that will only make everything else so much harder. The loops in this map are generally extremely safe. Generally speaking, they're all tremendously safe. The jungle gyms and the structures are mostly safe. There is a unique type of structure to this map. 2 unique types of structure to this map that only appear here at Temple, and that appear in Ormond occasionally, and I believe, yeah. So there's some unique tiles that spawn on this map, and none of them are good news. They have a lot of lockers to hide in. They have strong windows. They have decent pallets that often connect with other tiles or other smaller, pallet loops, which are not even bad. They're not the same loops as the temple, but similar to temple, they have huge logs with pallets or huge piles of cut up wood with pallets, and these can be sometimes close to Shag, and honestly, there's nothing great about this map. Who was this map made for? The hunters, who is very slow? Definitely not. The one of the speedy killers that still has to deal with all the windows on the strong pallets? Most certainly not. The stealth killers, they don't have a really good time here either. This map is bad for everybody. It's bad for everybody. I'm trying to find some redeeming factors to it, but I'll tell you a couple of redeeming factors. Sometimes some of the generators, similarly to Temple, can be a bit dead zone-ish. Some of the generators that survivors might leave for later, or that you might catch them at the start, are just next to a tree, next to nothing, and they need to actually step a little away. They can be an easy first hit, or depending on your killer or depending on your approach, can be an easy first down. So some of the survivors will expose themselves when they work on some of the generators that are really not that great. As I said, the main building, the Shag, it's all pretty damn strong, but it's not strong it's not the absolute strongest. So hopefully against an average team of survivors, they'll be able to do something, but they won't hold you back forever. And eventually you'll get your downs. Maybe you'll use the middle basement. Maybe you'll get on top of the building to scatter around a little bit. Maybe when they try to use the windows in the main building, you'll mind game them a little bit and get a hit. Those things can happen, and that's how you win games. But this is a very, very scary map where when you spawn, you need to have you cannot turn your brain off. You need to have a very clear path that you're going to follow that goes like, okay, I'm going to check this gen, and worst case scenario, it's last gen and I stop them before they complete it. Because if you stop by a gen and waste a little bit too much time, another gen could pop in the distance immediately and set you back and make it really, really hard for you to come back. So be very afraid of this map, respect its massive girth and square kilometrage, but yeah, that's, I believe, all there is to say about it. Another good thing about it, I suppose, is that sometimes in some parts of the maps that are a bit more dead zone-ish, you will have slightly better lines of sight, and you might make it hard for survivors to come to certain places without being spotted. But again, that's just a small redeeming factor after a list of very bad qualities. Hence why this is one of the worst maps in the game that you can get. Next up, this map obviously has a very, very high escape rate compared to others. And the next one that we're going to see is also in the top most hideous, high escape rate maps. And honestly, considering that this map has been to work recently, I am completely flabbergasted by just how ridiculous this map is. I'm talking, of course, about Gas Heaven. It's the final Auto Haven map. And it's, I think, by a long mile, the worst map right now. Blood Lodge could have been around here, maybe some time ago. But I think this map, I don't know if it's gotten better, but it's definitely, at the very least, it's still really, really bad. I don't know if it's gotten worse with the update, but it's still very horrible. So what do we have? What is unique about Gas Heaven? Gas Heaven is one of the larger maps in the game, right? So it's tied for the 5th largest map in the game. It actually has the same. You tell me if you believe this. It actually has the same size as the Wretched Shop, but whereas the Wretched Shop has a building close to the middle and a shack relatively close to the middle, and nothing on the edges, this map is evil. This map has everything on the edges. The middle is, has a bit of a Blood Lodge vibe to it, or you can have a lot of safe, relatively safe pallets where the average killer needs to work really hard to get out of the way or get a hit in, that are mostly unmind gameable. And oh my god, it gets so bad. It gets so bad. One of the most defining factor of this, the most defining factor of this map that makes it stand out from the other ones like it is the fact that you have 2 incredibly large, huge walls of wrecked cars on both sides of the map. Even though this is already a large map, the fact that these walls are here makes the relative size of this map much bigger and feel way bigger than it actually is. Let me give you an example in case you skip to this part and you're not following. If you're chasing a survivor that's running towards a corner in, say, the clinic, the Lever's Memorial, the hospital, as a survivor approaches a corner, you can begin to cut them off and then eventually get to them. There's no such thing in this map. On these corners are a lot of generators, and when you get to them from either side of the car walls, survivors will start running on the opposite side. So these huge maps that require you to make, pilgrimages to each generator have a way for the survivors to avoid you as you do this. And this wouldn't be a problem if it wasn't for the fact that the generators are literally on these edges of the map. The gen spread on this map is disgusting. Gens are easy to find for survivors. You got one that spawns in the main building, one that spawns here. They're relatively easy to find for the survivors. They have zero problem finding them. And the killer obviously knows where the generators are, but getting to them is another matter. They are in such evil positions that two of these generators basically are on the edges of these car walls, and getting to them is, basically just basically a gamble. If you get there and the survivor has a bit of a head start, they can go all the way around, and then by the time you catch up, they start looping you on whatever it is they have at hand. And they have a lot at hand. There's multiple structures. Let me count how many in my head. I think there are 4 structures, many of which will become, will be jungle gyms in the map. They're all close or in proximity to these walls, and in between them, the shack. In between all of this, also the occasional small loop pallet. In the middle, tons of pallets, all of which are generally safe. One hook that always spawns there. The hooks in this map are sometimes difficult, again, because of walls. And then we get to the main building. The main building is just evil. It's just terrible. I despise it. There's a few configurations. Either the main door will be open and there will be a breakable wall, or it will be the other side. One of the doors will be open, and then the windows, they also swap out. But almost any of them is bad for killer. You can hear a generator being worked inside. Getting there and stopping it is very, very difficult. It requires a huge commitment of time. You will often need to break breakable walls to make it more palatable, which again is a commitment of time. And the survivors can waste your time here in a number of very evil ways. They can go through the window and loop around the back. They have pallets either on the front or the back, and often not too far. So they can run you around and then get to a pallet and then drop it. And they can stall you a lot here. And this gen is very hard to defend because of that. And then the other 2 gens that we mentioned are very hard to defend because of that. And no matter where you are, you're going to be wasting time somewhere. So the other gens are also going to be popping. So you have so many gens in this map that survivors can basically do for free. Where if you try to pressure them, you will genuinely not really have a great time. You will have a very, very, the odds will be against you in terms of whether or not you down them quickly. You will often need to get there and they'll have a head start on you because of the wall, or they'll start to drop pallets, or they'll start to stall for time. It's going to be very, very hard. The way you win this map, if such a thing is possible, is to find the survivors that will go down quickly elsewhere in the map and down them, and to create pressure by downing survivors quickly. So if you down multiple survivors and you put them in the basement, usually shag, or if you put them in the middle, and then everybody needs to come and get involved, and then you start downing them, that's how you win this map. You will rarely win this map because you defend gens so good, and because, you kick gens so much. If survivors are smart, that will be very difficult. I've also had matches where I down people, I put them on the hook, and then nobody shows up. They just do the gens. They leave the hard gens for me for the end. Then last second, they come in, they get the save, and now I have 3 gens that are in different peninsulas each, and they're just impossible to hold. Extremely, extremely difficult map. We haven't even talked about survivor perks too much throughout this map tier list, but I think this map warrants talking about some of them. A survivor with sprint burst can be in a really safe place, and if they see you coming, they can get a head start on you by running around. Life in this map is great. Don't forget that this map will still have either a crane or it will have one of the vehicles. So if you get one of the worst ones, that's also going to be there in the middle. Good luck with that. I believe, hold up. It's kind of, I don't know if there is a special rule for gas 7. But I believe that it can spawn. I'm thinking whether the boss can spawn there anymore after the rework. But still, you have a vehicle in the middle. And let me retake my train of thought. Would have done me good to maybe double check that one. You have a lot of things that are basically, you're really going against the wind here. The generator spread is horrible. The pallet spread is great, and the survivor perks, as I was trying to say, assist them in a number of ways. If you have a survivor with Object of Obsession, and they can see you through the building, and they can see you through these car walls, it makes this utterly difficult ordeal even harder, because they literally have a head start with Swimmers, with Object, with communications. If they're on a survivor fence call, it makes all of this even harder. And it is honestly a very, very, very tricky map to play. Almost no killer benefits from any of this. Nurses, they still don't see behind the walls. They can still be juked in the main building. Stealth killers, the needle is entirely open. Survivors can still often see you when you go around. Like, it's really, really hard. I wouldn't say any killer does particularly well. Just play your strongest killer and pray that the RNG is not too bad, that the survivors are not too smart, and that none of them run you the way you can run someone here. But perhaps even more evil than this, if it's even possible, is the next map, which is the Fracture Cowshed. This map used to be even worse, and with the other maps, it had a bit of a rework, but it's still fairly ridiculous and fairly difficult to deal with. So it has the worst of every farm map, and then some. Where do I even begin? Let's start with the obvious. In the middle, you will have one of two, either a combine harvester or a cow tree. You will have on one corner of the map a main building, on the other corner of the map a shack. The map is actually fairly big. It's one of the bigger maps, and as you'll see if you play it for 2 minutes, there's stuff everywhere on this map. It's not all concentrated in the middle. There are gens that are very close to the edges. There are pallets and structures and hiding places that are all very close to the edges. Both buildings are very close to the edges as well. And everything is surrounded by pallets and strong loops that honestly make this a bit of a nightmare. Let's start with the main building. The main building has a window that can give you a bit of leverage, a basement that's a bit awkward to defend, and two pallets on opposite sides that are both fairly strong, which means that you can be chasing the main building, loop a window, then be totally safe, then be totally safe again, then probably go elsewhere and be totally safe, or you can come from anywhere else and find safety on the edges of the main building. This is a guaranteed pallet spawn on either side that just basically means that survivors always have some form of safety. Because it's on opposite ends, even if the building switches sides, it doesn't matter where you come from, you're almost always going to find either a window or one of these two pallets to assist you. So, very, very, very strong. Even stronger considering that it spawns next to pretty packed pallet spawns and stuff. Between each corner of the map, basically, there are these little trails. And along these trails, you often have these long cart-like loops that have a pallet on the side. And these loops are just cruel. They can spawn on the sides. They can combo really, really well into shack. They can combo really, really well into main building. They can combo really, really well from shack to one of the 4, I believe, tiles that spawn, and they are the connective tissue to this insane monster of a map. Unfortunately, even though the generators are on the edges of the map, none of them are really truly too unsafe. There's one in the middle that is surrounded by a ton of corn, which makes it inherently a little bit safer for survivors, and will often get done almost no matter what, because it's easy to find. The gens in this map are not even particularly hard to find. One of them is always, you can always find them predictably. Then the other gens that can spawn in awkward places on the edges of the map are not even unsafe. This is not like Wretched Shop, where some of the gens are unsafe. This is not like even Ormond, where some of the gens are unsafe. Almost every single gen is either well hidden behind some hay bale, not too far from a pallet. That's the worst case scenario for survivors. Or straight up next to a pallet, next to another pallet, or inside a jungle gym or some kind of tile, some kind of structure. There's almost no place to be in this map where you're not arm's length away from a string of pallet window. And the worst part is that virtually every single one of these pallets, with I believe barely any exception, are pretty strong, pretty safe pallets. The kind that once dropped, you must probably break immediately, unless you fancy chasing a survivor for bloodlusting, amounts of time. And that's pretty much it. The totems are well known and well studied because this map has been around for literally some centuries. They can also spawn in the middle of the map in the corn, which would make your hex build a very sad affair. Gems are easy to find. It's easy to rotate. It's a large map with executs that don't really benefit you at all. The spawns, like there's so much stuff protecting survivors that spawns are often. If the survivors are unpredictable, you will not see coming where they're starting. You can go to a building with a conviction that they might have 3 people there and they might have just all hidden and gone the other way. It is very often that you'll find that the gen that you spawn next to is just the gen that they end up going, and that gen pops and you never bother to check it in a little while. So it is honestly quite terrible. Only saving grace of this map, sometimes the RNG is not too terrible. They get a couple LT walls that are not connected to much. They don't get the good pallets, in the right places. And maybe you play a killer that has some mobility and you don't mind the distance too much. Or maybe you make an amazing play and you just win by pure raw skill. But other than that, this map is a clear uphill battle. Consistently ranks amongst the hardest for killer in the stats that the developers put out. And would almost be the worst map in the game if we didn't have another one after it. And another one we are 3.5 hours in, and we talk about Haddonfield. Oh man. Haddonfield. The actual name of the map is Lampkin Lane, and it is very Lampkin Lane. This map is terrible. It is the 4th biggest map in the game, and like the best in its class. Not only is it actually big in size, it's actually big in relative size. So what I mean by this, again, is that when you chase a survivor for 30 minutes to a corner of the map, not only will you have to chase them for that long, once you get to that corner, they will now have a huge building that's empty. It's like a huge loop, a huge fence, or a huge building that you can go inside and loop, or sometimes all of them next to each other. That's the beauty of Haddonfield. It's like a box of chocolate, and and you don't know what you're gonna get, but they're all terribly poisoned, and you're intolerant to sugar. It's horrible. So let's talk about what spawns in Haddonfield. We have a returning villain, the House of Pain. The House of Pain is the building that has a basement into it that has a generator always in it. This is exactly the same structure as the one in Badham, so it shares many of its similarities. That being said, this version does not have any breakable walls at all to make it more to make it more manageable, and as a result, is a little bit more predictable for survivors. And also, their staircases are see-through, which I think they're not on Badham. So that means that a survivor sitting in this basement can actually see you come a lot easier. They have less guessing and more actual information about where you are. I believe I've heard Scott John, my friend Scott, say that this house is actually an infinite against Huntress, because she literally cannot catch up with 110 speed if they run it well and certain windows get open. So this might actually be an actual infinite against some killers. Obviously, you don't want to chase a survivor if they run you here, but if it's not an infinite, my goodness, it is very close. You can run a killer here for an extremely long amount of time. Again, going back to Badham, you have a top floor with up to there are 5 windows, all right, and the way they open is a little bit different, but it always goes in tandem. When one of them is closed, the other one is open, and no matter which combination you get, it doesn't matter. You will have a strong window to come out of and vault. You will have a strong window to come out of and vault directly in front of you. You'll have a strong window to come out and go to your right and vault. The windows there can be used by themselves with the obnoxious, this is Haddonfield special, with the obnoxious long fences that often spawn around this and every other house, basically. You can use them by themselves, or you can use them in conjunction with the basement. And that's where they really, really shine. You can go into basement, then come out of the window, he chases you, you go back into basement, now you come out, now you go through the other window, then you go around, then he catches up, then you go back into basement, then he catches up, oh, bloodlust, drop the pallet, oh, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? Break the pallet, now he chases you, you come out of the window, now you go back into the window, now he chases you a little bit again, now the window gets blocked because the entity has had enough of this, and, you know, and by that point, you've already died of old age. It's honestly gross just how strong these windows are when survivors know how to play them. Again, luckily for you, most survivors don't play this very well. Ethan, one of the developers, recently revealed that Haddonfield is does not have a particularly great escape rate. And there are some reasons why. One of them is because the average survivor doesn't know how to play these buildings really well. So that's in your favor. If you go against a survivor that looks a little bit smarter than the average and is using them well, please, by all means, do what you want. But I would advise that you do not chase that person very long. So we got the House of Pain that can spawn in one of several locations, right? I think it's one of... Yeah, no, it's not one of several locations. I think it's one of 3 locations. Yeah, there's 3 buildings that I think get swapped over. I think it's one of 3 locations. I'm almost sure. So the House of Pain can spawn in one of these locations, and as we've said, it's very, very strong. There's always a pallet down in either side. It's very easy to use. A beginner can make this a strong place. An advanced player can make it unbearable for a killer, and you will be forced to go there either to defend a generator or to chase a survivor that goes there at times. So it is quite painful. If this house is in one of the edges of the map, it's even worse. When it spawns across the road from the main building, which is in the center, forgive me, it's not as bad because you might have a chance to go there on and off throughout your normal chases. But when it's on the edges of the map, and it often is, going down there is even more of a commitment, because if you're not successful and you don't get what you want, you will be very, very far away from everything and everyone else. So, bad business all around when it comes to this house. Next up, we've got 2 houses, basically, that can also appear on and off with these buildings. And what they often have is just a generator on the bottom or the top floor, a bunch of windows that are, they're not the craziest, but that survivors can use to more or less success to waste your time. Also, unless you're one of like a few killers, a survivor that's on a building working on a generator is a huge commitment of time. You understand, right? If you see a survivor that's next to you on a generator, in virtually every other map, you go there and you whack them and they need to get off. If you see a survivor right in front of you doing a generator in a building, you need to go there, you need to take the stairs, you need to go around, and then they drop the window and then they start running away. And God forbid they have balanced landing. In that case, they'll be able to wait their last second and drop at the very, very final minute, and then still make a lot of distance to go wherever they will please. So this is really, really, really tough stuff dealing with this basement, with this double-story houses in the first place. It is a commitment of time. It is very, very tricky. Sometimes you can get plausible 3 gens with the building in the main building, with the gen in the main building, one on the streets. So the generators that spawn by the main road in the streets, they're actually very easy to defend. But if survivors do those generators, then the ones left will be very, very hard for you. So you want to hang on to those in the middle as much as you humanly can, because they're the ones that you'll have an easier time defending and keep patrolling and keep an eye out throughout the game. And And what else to say about this side buildings? They're just kind of nasty, but they're not the absolute worst. The House of Pain is a lot more of a concern. A lot more of a concern as well is the main building. The main building is quite disgusting. As far as I understand it, there are 4 windows on the second floor, and 3 of them will always be open. So that one of them is a straight drop, and the other 2 will lead to the back and the front. Roofs or balconies, depending on how you look at it. Going here doesn't give the survivors a lot of, like, being on the balcony doesn't give them a lot of stuff, but it's basically an escape route. When they're working on the gen and you take them there, they go there, you vault them, then they drop, then they go back into the building and up again. And you can do this several times. There are actually things you can do to make this a bit more manageable. If you know that a survivor is dropping from the building and going back inside, you can actually follow them and whiff. You can use your attack to turn around and catch up to the survivor. I found out that lunging as you fall can actually make you turn around back into the building faster. You can also mind game it at times, and some survivors will fall for it. But it's still a very, very, very strong idea, the whole dropping down until the killer catches you. And the real kicker is that on the bottom floor, there's 3 windows basically. Yeah, 3 windows that can spawn. The one on the main entrance and the one on the back door, they're basically worthless. They're next to a wall, next to a door. So if they go through that window, you just go around and hit them. But the one that's next to the basement, which by the way always spawns there, that one is really troublesome. That one is a very strong window, a really, really strong window. Actually, there's 4 windows. There's also one that leads into the basement, which they can use to get into the basement by the entrance. But ignoring that one, the real window that you have to worry, that you need to check to see if it's there. If you're a survivor, you won the lottery. If you're the killer, you need to pray that they don't realize it, is the one that's next to basement, at the top of the stairs of basement. That window there is powerful. A survivor can go up, can go through the window, you can follow them, then they can do the same thing, you can follow them, and by the time they catch up, they, instead of going up again, they just go through and drop through that window. And guess what they're gonna do? Guess what they're gonna do if you follow them? They're gonna go around and they're gonna go through the same window. And here is where you really wish you brought bamboozle or a shotgun or something to stop this tomfoolery. It's really, really painful. A survivor that runs this house well is a huge pain. And some killers, with range attacks, with traps, they can do something about it. The average killer, however, will have a hard time. So avoid at all costs engaging in chases here that lead nowhere. If survivors send you here with a Haddonfield offering and they have balanced landing and they know what they're doing, you're in for a world of hurt. But even that, I don't think is the biggest part. The biggest pain about this map. The biggest pain about this map is the fact that you're going to spawn in one place. And you're going to guess with your general killer intuition that the survivors are probably across the map ahead of you. Where do you go? Where do you go? Where do you go? Where do you go? Where? You don't know. If you go into one of the buildings and check, and you don't hear anything, they might be hiding there waiting for you to leave, or they might all have immediately gone to another gen. Using your perks and checking for lines of sight and listening to breathing to see if you're walking next to a bush with someone in it is all extremely important in this map. You need to find someone quick. God forbid they begin to split up and really start doing the gens that matter. On top of these buildings that we've said, in between the buildings are fences of different sizes. And RNG plays a big part. Fences can be short and manageable and just a little inconvenience to go around. And they can also extend to the length of the Great Wall of China. And I'm not exaggerating. I wish I could say I was. The lengths where these fences can go are ridiculous. You can pick up a survivor, see a hook 3 feet away from you, and then be like, okay, how do I get to that hook? Okay, where's the... And you can go around and around and around and around, and the fences can sometimes just make a big map that has buildings actually be even bigger. Because to cross even a small gap, you need to go around so much stuff. It is honestly distasteful. And the average killer has a really, really hard time. There are some... Let's not talk about the positives yet. We're not done yet. There are also other buildings that are completely empty. They don't have anything inside. They're just huge loops that will force you to go around them. This is similar to what happens with Gas Heaven. You know there's a big empty house on the corner of the map, and there's a gen on the other side. When you chase a survivor, the survivor's going to go the other way. And you're going to have this cat and mouse, cat and mouse, cat and mouse. Eventually you'll catch up, and then they'll be on a pallet likely. That is, for the most part, safe. The pallets in this map have predetermined spawn points, and sometimes you can get lucky and get to a place and be like, hey, this map didn't spawn a pallet here. Great. Sometimes you will chase a survivor only to find that they get the pallet exactly when they need it, and exactly when it hurts you the most. And it's really, 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 really tough. Some of these pallets spawn next to the empty building. Some of them spawn next to the other buildings that we talked about. In between them, there are these little parks that are open clearings, where if your totem spawns there, they're going to see it in 3 seconds. These parks generally have at least a couple pallets, or at least one, and they're generally pretty damn safe. Very few exceptions. Some killers can get hits on these. Hunters can hit over some of these. Deathslinger can get easy hits on most of these. Some killers can do something about these pallets. They're not 100% safe, but they are generally speaking pretty damn safe. And a great connective tissue again. A great connecting glue that holds this map together. In between the buildings, to have strong safe pallets. In the middle, some cars, some bands with pallets next to them. These are not as powerful, but they're in the middle, so they're gonna see some use, and you can sometimes make mistakes around them, so be careful. But yeah, let's talk about the positives. This map, even though the gens are actually pretty fixed, does not have as much gen immediacy as some of the other maps. If you want to know if a gen is done, you actually need to go and sometimes even go around and see if that gen is done or not, if you don't remember it, right? Or if you don't know if the gen is there. So survivors, I believe this is one, if not the main reason, why survivors don't escape as often in this map as they do on Rotten Fields, or Gas Heaven, or the Cowshed. Survivors that are kind of new will have a slightly harder time, right? Finding generators and navigating this map, because again, the fences are awkward, etc., etc. The problem though is that you don't know which one it is. When I go against great survivors in this map, they all start to hide, they all start to spread out, and before I know it, 6 gens pop and I am crying in a corner. When I play against horrible survivors that are super new, that die at 5 gens, they do the same thing. I don't find anyone at the start. And sometimes you don't find them because they're really smart and they're playing stealthily really well around you, and they're setting up the first gen completions. And sometimes you don't find them because they're just as lost as you. So don't, be faithful. Trust in your instinct. Sometimes, you can win very bigly in this map. The fact that some of the fences are really, really tight also means that survivors often don't have a lot of room to dodge pyramid head attacks, to dodge hunters' hatchets, to dodge a good mean Billy Chenso. So this map does have some positives. Some of these slumps you can do things about with many killers. The fact that the basement is so centralized is great for a trapper, is great for a hag. If you put someone in the center, you'll be everywhere. You'll be a little spider extending its web. Basically everywhere that matters around the center, because the basement is always there. So there are some redeeming qualities to this map that you must take advantage of. And it's a slightly harder map than some of the previous ones we talked about for the average survivor. The average survivor might be a little bit lost. They might not realize that there's a gen in that house and they didn't see it, but it's there. And they might not realize that the flickering on the house means that there's a gen inside that's not completed. And the fully lit house means that the gen there was completed. But if you play against good survivors that have experience, Haddonfield might actually just be the worst map in the game. And after Haddonfield comes nothing else. Thank goodness. We've been talking about maps for almost 4 hours. I understand that I rambled on a little bit. And do forgive me. I'm sure I also omitted. It's funny how you can ramble, but also sometimes omit certain things. I'm sure I omitted some fact that you might feel is useful. I would really, really appreciate it if you let me know in the comments so I can learn it and other people can learn it as well. But before I go, let me tell you that the map that you get is only one of many factors. All right, everything I've discussed is nice and sweet, but it doesn't matter. You can go on Haddonfield and win at 5 gens. And you can go on Hawkins, for example, with the best killer and the best add-ons and the best everything, and still get absolutely demolished. The most important thing in this game is your hour count and your experience. That's probably the most important thing. After that comes maybe your killer, and the add-ons and how strong of perks of a loadout you have. Of course, the survivors that you go against play a major role. Are they good? Are they bad? Are they having a good day? Are they a bit clumsy? Do you get lucky with the RNG in any map? Does your build work out? Was it ill conceived? All of these things are way more important than the map you play in. So please, knowing all of this, do not do not be discouraged if you get a difficult map. In difficult maps, we play our greatest matches. Mahatma Gandhi 1920 whatever. I made that up, but you know what I mean, right? You will have the highest potential to outplay a survivor when they are the most confident. So just, pleasant thoughts. Wanted to remind you of that. Thank you so very much for watching. I'm now going to edit this and maybe try to... Should I even... Oh my god. I don't want to think about it. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.